Hello and welcome to the Notcast podcast, the one true chapter by chapter podcast going through A Song of Ice and Fire one chapter a week. I'm one of your hosts, Jeff, better known as Britta B. Fish.
And I'm your other host, Emmett, better known as Poor Quentin.
And welcome to the 119th episode of the Notcast titled We the People, Part 1, an analysis of A Clash of Kings, Tyrion 9, in which Princess Myrcella leaves for Dorne. Oh, yeah, and city erupts into violence as Joffrey finally goes too far. But really, guys, mostly this chapter is about the Dorne thing.
In Tyrion's diary, that's all he writes down. Princess Myrcella left for Dorne, nothing else of importance.
Right. I mean, you have to color the history in the way that best benefits your memory, right? And I think that's a great way to... Yes, Myrcella was dispatched to Dorne, and then I write back in the Red Keep right after that. Yes.
History is written by the winners, and Tyrion is, of course, a winner, as we all know.
Yeah, about that. So, as always, this episode is brought to you by our small council. Our Hand of the King, Wolfman Zach, Grand Maester Tim Bob, Troubleshooter of Systems and Designer of Circuit Boards, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Mark N., Lord Travis, Master of Ships and War of the Waves, Captain of the War Galley, Nightwolf, the ship that stalks the seven seas, and wielder of the Valyrian Steel Trident, Summoner, the blade that brings the deep ones, Sir Keith J., Master of Whispers, Lord Philip the Merciful, Master of Laws, Archmaester June, Healer of the Lesser Poxes, Racken Michael, Ward of the North, Nelson the Hammer, Prince of Dragonscone, Scarlet the Other Woman, and Mistress of Whispers, Lord Micah, the Quilled Lion, Ward of the West, the Herald of the Golden Tooth, Master of the Baneford, the Kraken's Bane, Lord James, the gem that was promised, the High Bearded Priest, Lord Jake, Assistant to the Hand of the King, Lady Zena Valyrian, Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dane, and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club. His Grace's High Inquisitor, Sir Frank B., Sir Jasper the Cruel, the King's Justice, Lawrence, Prince of Dorne, Kelly, Ward of the East and Mistress of Old Bay of Crabs, Stephen the Steadfast, Master of Hounds, the Blue Winter Rose, Knight of Highgarden, Lady Stephanie, Lord Adamus, Lord Carlos, Lord Andrew the Restless, the Priest of the Drowned God, the King's Cook, Noli Oli, Master of Cannoli, Sir Sorcidelica, Prince Matthew of House Targaryen, Proud Soyboy of Summerhall, Defender of the Fifth Book, and Swing Dancer with Dragons, Sir K.W. Dent, Elsie the Blackwood Guard, and Batman of the Seven Kingdoms, Lord Penchant for Nostalgia, Queer Alex, Rainbow Commander of the Ladies and Gentledems, Lord Quint Esquire, Master of Absolutely Positively not serving as a spy for several unnamed high lords and ladies in order to further the secret Blackfire-style conspiracy to overthrow the oppressive small council. Haldover, the Waiter for T-Wow, A.A. Braun, Damphair, Prophet of the Forsaken, and High Priest of Euron, Crow's Eye. Lieutenant Glenn, Lord of H-Town, Veneris of House Colgarian, the First of her name, Princess of Dragonstone, Mistress of Art, the Overwork, Queen of the Petzels, the Eraser, the First Draft, Queen of Monochrome, Devotee the Great Game of Thrones, Portraits of the Realm, Lady Real Seven Kingdoms, Blender Paints, and Maker of Drawings. Shumel the Slayer, Lord Adam T., Lady Alexander of Tarth, Sir Christoph Logus, Bloody Scorpio of the Redfield, Defender of the Letter of Kin, and the Wolverine of House Corgoyle. Lady Elizabeth, Mistress of Horse-Faced Lesbians, Sir Josh Snow, Bastard Bounty Hunter of the North, Surveyor, Chief of Parties in the Frozen Wastes, Lord Peter, Lady Ashley, the Dead Shepherd Reborn, Preacher to the Poor Fellows, Marshall, Harrison, still absent, still shipwrecked in the Jade Sea. Grave, Robb Stark, the Cadaver King and Horror of Harrenhal. Olaf, proponent of establishing a feudal pseudo-democratic system of great councils wherein every count votes. Sir Tim, the knight who is guided by voices. Lord Nick, Thucydides, Lord of Plagues. Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dane and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club. Lord Jean the Splendid, Master of Coin, Ward of Tampa Bay. Lady Anna, the lovely Castellan. Pat Ironwood, the Blood Royal and Guardian of the Boneway. Lord Charles Tyrell of Highgarden, Lord Paramount the Manor, Defender of the Marches, High Marshal of the Breach, Ward of the South, and the heir of House Tyrell. Luke, Lord of Lone Leaf and the Pillar of Autumn. Thank you to our small counselors very much.
Thank you, counselors, as always.
And our spoiler warning, as we say in all episodes, we'll potentially be talking about all published books. That is the 5 novels, 3 documented novellas, histories, interviews, the Windsor sample chapters, as well as Game of Thrones, the TV show. Anything and everything.
Our question this week comes from one of our small council patrons, Lord Micah, Warden of the West and the Kraken's Bane, who asks, here's an AU for a future episode. What changes for the War of Five Kings if Horus and Haber Redwine, for some reason, never went to King's Landing in a Game of Thrones, thus giving Renly a Redwine fleet that could be used? Does he attack Dragonstone with it? Does he have time? Does the fleet take Dragonstone for the Lannisters much sooner than the Feast for Crows after Renly's death? So what do you think about that, Jeff? What happens if Horror and Slobber never get to King's Landing and Paxter Redwine has a free hand to act?
I think Paxter Redwine obviously joins up with the Tyrell cause. I think the only reason that he is being left behind is that he is obviously his 2 sons are being held hostage by the Lannisters, and he's aware that him siding with his banner, with his liege would mean that they're likely deaths. What happens in that AU situation with that happens, then Renly gets the Redwine fleet, and it gets used probably, I don't know. The timing of it all is kind of weird. Here's the thing about it. It's like I don't see where it actually impacts anything like Renly's death, the taking of Storm's End, this Battle of the Blackwater, maybe even because this fleet takes a long ass time to get from the Arbor all the way over to King's Landing in a Storm of Swords. Like it takes like the entirety of the book. And by the time they reach King's Landing, like right at the start of Feast for Crows, they immediately have to turn around and sail back to Dragonstone because Euron attacks the Arbor and attacks the Reach. So Lord Redwine then sails back and is still starting in a Feast for Crows, moving through a Dance with Dragons, still not there in the Winds of Winter in the Forsaken. Still has, I think, is mentioned in the Forsaken, which we'll be covering next in just a few weeks for part 3. Is that Lord Redwine's fleet is actually just finally turned the Arm of Dorne at whatever point this is in the Winds of Winter, but it's pretty far in the timeline. So the fleets don't actually sail that quickly. I could see a situation where it has an impact on post-battle Blackwater stuff, but again, it's hard to say what that impact would be beyond, I guess, Stannis would be sincerely and truly fucked before he even has the chance to get north to the Wall. So I think that's kind of the outlines of what I would see if the Red Wine fleet was actively engaged in the War of the Five Kings at this time. But yeah, all good and well. What do you think, sir?
Well, I think right there, I think you hit on one reason why George has to keep the Red Wine fleet out of commission for so long, because he doesn't want Stannis to lose this early in the fight. And if the Lannisters have a giant fleet easily at their disposal, Stannis doesn't last long enough in the Storm of Swords to get to the Wall. And potentially we see a reason in the Winds of Winter that George wants Euron someone to take out and prove his powers on his way to Old Town, and the Red Wine fleet is conveniently there for that purpose. Yeah, I think everything would depend on where the Red Wine fleet was when Stannis laid siege to Storm's End, and when Renly showed up to deal with Stannis, and how the Red Wine fleet reacted afterwards. Because if Paxter Redwine's on hand when Stannis kills Renly at Storm's End, then if he potentially joins Stannis, I'm not sure how much of an impact it has on the Battle of Blackwater. I'm not deep into the weeds on the naval strategy of it. So, obviously, Tyrion's plan delays just long enough, but I'm not, that could be interesting to see. But yeah, I think the Red Wine fleet is this interesting kind of just pawn to move around the board for George, because I think he's clearly kept it in reserve in the same way that the armies of the Vale have been kept in reserve just for George to use on one of a number of purposes. And I think we're starting to see those shape up now.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And just as a side note, some friends of mine, Jen Snow from Reddit, Adam Feldman also from Reddit, a couple years ago, they did the Massive Song of Ice and Fire timeline. If you guys have read that on Google Documents. And one of the ways that you actually use it to time things is where the Red Wine fleet is in relation to how character beats and character movements are operating. So it is a interesting, weird way that you can actually calculate distance and time and when things are actually timed in the narrative overall. But yeah, I think obviously the Red Wine fleet is there to be a stumbling block for someone down the road, or to potentially be dead meat for Euron Greyjoy. I mean, it could be both at the same time, but yeah, you can't have the Red Wines entering the battle, the war too soon, or else it's over for Stannis without it being a chance. And all of the narrative tension then gets strained away from that actual event itself, which is quite the cinematic climax to A Clash of Kings, and we are not that far from that event in this book. I'm very excited about getting to that.
All the pieces are really moving into place for the Battle of Blackwater, and that's going to be a prime highlight for us for sure. No question about that. So thank you, Lord Micah, for the question. If you'd like to ask us questions, we answer here on the Nauticast podcast. You are welcome to become a Sworn Sword or higher level patron over at patreon.com/Nauticast ASOIAF, where you can get show notes, access to our Nautislack for our 2 highest tiers, and bonus episodes like our first 2 parts of The Second Coming, our full analysis of the Winds of Winter chapter, The Forsaken. And we will be back to record next week, part 3 of The Second Coming. If that or any other Patreon benefits interest you, consider heading on over to patreon.com/Nauticast ASOIAF to join up.
Yes, and we just hit over 1,000 total patrons this week, and we're very grateful and gratified to all of you who are supporting us. Many of you are in the chat itself or our live stream, and we appreciate you all very, very much, and all of your support every single month. It means a lot. And thank you also to all the messages we received on Patreon. We've gotten a lot recently. I just figured I would just shout out some of the ones that we've gotten. We've gotten some from Anna, Lorena, Lord Charles, Tyrell of Highgarden, one of our small council people. Thucydides, also Lord of Plagues, one of our small council folks. Caitlin, Luke, and Lord of Lone Leaf and the Pillar of Autumn. We appreciate all of your guys' messages, and even if we can't respond immediately, it means a lot to us. We really, really appreciate that, and all of your encouragement and passion. It's great. Thank you so much. But enough about Patreon. When we last hung out with Tyrion, he had hosted a small council session in which Littlefinger was dispatched to arrange the Tyrell-Lannister marriage alliance, while the stability of King's Landing hung on a knife's edge. Let's find out how Joffrey nearly gets his ass knifed in this synopsis of A Clash of Kings, Tyrion 9. The girl never wept. Young as she was, Myrcella Baratheon was a princess born, and a Lannister despite her name. Tyrion reminded himself as much Jaime's blood as Cersei's. To be sure, her smile was a shade tremulous when her brothers took their leave of her on the deck of the Sea Swift. But the girl knew the proper words to say, and she said them with courage and dignity. When the time came to part, it was Prince Tommen who cried, and Myrcella who gave him comfort. Man, Emmett, what a lovely start to this chapter. Just remember this moment. Hold on to it, because it's going to be the happiest fucking moment of this chapter. From atop the decks of King Robert's Warhammer, Tyrion looks down at the parting ceremony, ruefully wondering about whether it's all that smart to be sending this ship along with 3 other ships to escort Myrcella to Braavos. Wait, Myrcella is going to Braavos? Yes, it's convoluted, but let's simplify it here for this synopsis. They're heading off to Braavos first, going to wait there for a bit, and then sail down to Dorne. If Stannis was monitoring the seas, he would never suspect that they'd send Myrcella to Braavos first before they went to Dorne. And Tyrion hopes that Stannis wouldn't risk the Sea Lord of Braavos' wrath by stashing Myrcella there for a little while before they went down to Dorne. Got it? Okay, good. Tyrion asks their captain if he knows their orders, and the man does. They're going to sail, avoid Dragonstone at all costs, and if they meet any enemy on the water, they either engage the ship if it's just one ship, and if it's more, then Myrcella's boat, the Sea Swift again, will run and be escorted by the Bold Wind, another ship, while the other ships do battle against the other ships. Kind of jumble it all up your head. It all works out in your head. If Lord Stannis knew of the sailing, he could not have chosen a better time to send his fleet against us. Tyrion glanced back to where the rush emptied out into Blackwater Bay and was relieved to see no signs of sails in the wide green horizon. At last report, the Baratheon fleet still lay off Storm's End, where Sir Courtney Penrose continued to defy the besiegers in dead Renly's name. Meanwhile, Tyrion's winch tower stood 3/4 complete. Even now, men were hoisting heavy blocks of stone into place, no doubt cursing him for making them work through the festivities. Let them curse. Another fortnight, Stannis. That's all I require. Another fortnight and it will be done. Myrcella kneels in front of the High Septon, who Tyrion describes as fat as a house, to receive the blessings from the faith. The old man drones on and on to Tyrion's irritation. But when he's finally done, Tyrion promises a reward of knighthood once Myrcella is safely delivered to Braavos. He promises this, of course, to the sea captains and the sailors who are aboard her ship. As he made his way down the steep plank to the quay, Tyrion could feel unkind eyes upon him. The galley rocked gently, and the movement underfoot made his waddle worse than ever. I'll wager they loved to snigger. No one dared, not openly, though we heard mutterings mingled with the creak of wood and rope and the rush of the river around the pilings. They do not love me, he thought. Well, small wonder. I'm well fed and ugly, and they are starving. Yeah, you're not wrong about that, Tyrion. Bronn is alongside Tyrion. Cersei's there too, ignoring Tyrion and making adoring smiles on Lancel. Cersei... okay, maybe don't do that given the sort of true rumors that are flying around about loving your family and shit like that. But speaking of Cersei, she'd been conspiring of late. Oh yeah, big fucking plans, guys. She'd just pretend to go out to Baelor's Sept to chat with the High Septon, but really she was going to hang out with Sir Osmond Kettleblack and his brother Osfried and Osney. And what conspiracy did Cersei plan with these rogues? To purchase her own sellswords. Oh no, this conspiracy is going to have major plot implications, right? No, not really. Not until a Feast of Crows anyways. Well, let her enjoy her plots, Tyrion thought. She was much sweeter when she thought she was outwitting him. The Kettleblacks would charm her, take her coin, and promise her anything she asked, and why not when Bronn was matching every copper penny, coin for coin. Amiable rogues, all 3. The brothers were in truth much more skilled at deceit than they'd been at bloodletting. Cersei had managed to buy herself 3 hollow drums. They would make all the fierce booming sounds she required, but there was nothing inside. It amused Tyrion to no end. The ship shoved off from King's Landing's docks, then accompanied by the sounds of horns. Tyrion sees Myrcella waving from the deck of the Sea Swift with Sir Aerys Oakheart standing behind her. Prince Tommen cries, and Joffrey tells him to shut up, and that princes don't cry. Sansa, being a brave hero, corrects Joffrey by saying that Aemon the Dragon Knight cried when Princess Nerys married Aegon the Unworthy, and Sir Arik and Sir Eric died crying while striking mortal wounds on each other's personage. In response, Joffrey says, hey, really good point now that I think about it. No, actually, he tells Sansa that he'll have Meryn Trant murder her if she doesn't shut the fuck up. Classic Joffrey move. Tyrion wonders if Cersei is so blind to Joffrey's faults as the ships make their ways down the Blackwater Rush. Spoilers, yeah, she is. Speaking of those ships and their captains, Varys had told Tyrion that the captains weren't traitors, so they'd probably not turn Myrcella over to Stannis. But then again, Varys wasn't the most trustworthy of folks about these parts. I rely too much on Varys, Tyrion reflected. I need my own informers. Not that I trust them either. Trust would get you killed. Speaking of untrustworthy folk, there had been no word from Littlefinger. Varys suggested that Littlefinger was dead, but fat chance. Most likely the Tyrells were busy rejecting the marriage alliance with Mace Tyrell not liking the possibility of Marjorie getting into bed with Joffrey. Literally. Anyways, Cersei indicates it's time to go, and Bronn gets all up into his saddle. Usually that was Podrick Payne's task, but the boy had, thankfully, thank God this happened, had been left behind in the Red Keep for today's festivities. As they trot back to the Red Keep, Tyrion notices gold cloaks holding the crowds back. He takes note of the party in relation to where he is. Jason Bywater is in front with armored lancers. Aaron, Centaur, and Balon Swan were behind with the King's banner, the Lannister line, and the Crown Stag sigils, and Joffrey was following the bannermen next to Sansa and between Sandor Clegane and Sir Mandon Moore. Behind them was a sniffling Tommen with Preston Greenfield riding shotgun for Tommen. Behind them, Cersei, Lancel, and the moron knights known as Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt were there. Tyrion decides to ride along with Big Sis Cersei. Behind all of them was a whole crowd of retainers, the High Septon and his litter, Horace Redwine, Lady Tanda, Jalabhar Zo, Lord Giles, Rosby coughing his way through the ride back with the others, and more guardsmen behind them. The unshaven and the unwashed stare at the riders with dull resentment from behind the line of spears. I like this not one speck, Tyrion thought. Bronn had a score of sellswords scattered through the crowds with orders to stop any trouble before it started. Perhaps Cersei had similarly disposed her kettleblacks. Somehow, Tyrion did not think it would help much. If the fire was too hot, you could hardly keep the pudding from scorching by tossing a handful of raisins in the pot. The party moves through the fishing square and moves through the Buddy Way before starting their ascent up Aegon's high hill. A few people hailed Joffrey, but hundreds more stayed silent and watched. Lannister Crimson rises through an ocean of hungry men, women, and children. Cersei laughs, and Tyrion is wondering if Cersei's spy sense is going off just like his. Probably thinks. Probably not, I think. Halfway along the route, a wailing woman forced her way between two watchmen and ran out into the street in front of the king and his companions, holding the corpse of her dead baby above her head. It was blue and swollen, grotesque, but the real horror was the mother's eyes. Joffrey looked for a moment as if he meant to ride her down, but Sansa Stark leaned over and said something to him. The king fumbled in his purse and flung the woman a silver stag. The coin bounced off the child and rolled away under the legs of the gold cloaks and into the crowd, where a dozen men began to fight for it. The mother never once blinked. Her skinny arms were trembling from the dead weight from her son. Yeah, so that wretchedness of a chapter gets me really fucking angry against Joffrey. Just the callousness, it really, makes me angry. Burns me up inside. Cersei tells Joffrey to leave the woman as she's unable to be helped, and the woman snaps out of her stupor and starts screaming that Cersei is a whore and a brother fucker over and over and over again. And then someone throws shit at Joffrey. Sansa gasps, and the quote-unquote king curses and demands to know who threw shit at him. He offers 100 golden dragons for someone to rat out the small folk guy who did it. Someone says that it came from above. People start shouting and cursing and pointing. Sansa begs Joffrey to let them go, but Joffrey won't. He orders Sandor Clegane to head into the crowd to bring the criminal to justice. Sandor gets off his horse and tries to make his way into the crowd, but a wall of people hold the hound back. Everyone starts pushing and shouting and trying to get away from Sandor Clegane. Tyrion smelled disaster. Clegane, leave off. The man has long fled. I want him, Joffrey pointed at the roof. He was up there. Dog, cut through them and bring. A tumult of sound drowned his last words, a rolling thunder of rage and fear and hatred that engulfed them from all sides. Bastard, someone shouted at Joffrey. Bastard, monster. Other voices flung calls of whore and brother fucker at the queen, while Tyrion was pelted with shouts of freak and half-man. Mixed in with the abuse, he heard a few cries of justice and Robb, King Robb, the young wolf of Stannis, and even Renly from both sides of the streets. The crowd surged against the spear shafts while the gold cloak struggled to hold the line. Stones and dung and fouler things whistled overhead. Feed us, a woman shrieked. Bread, boomed a man from behind her. We want bread, bastard. In a heartbeat, 1,000 voices took up the chant. King Joffrey and King Robb and King Stannis were forgotten, and King Bread ruled alone. Bread, they clamored. Bread, bread. Tyrion brings his horse quick up next to Cersei and orders them to get the fuck back to the Red Keep. Pronto. Cersei nods. Jason Bywater commands the lancers to make ready. They lower their lancers. Joffrey is spinning around his palfrey while people grab for his legs. One hand grasps the king's leg, and Manamor slashes with his sword, cutting the arm off. Tyrion orders everyone to ride forward and slaps Joffrey's horse to make it move, push forward. The masses scatter in front of the oncoming riders, and Tyrion and Bronn ride through them. A rock flies past Tyrion's head. A cabbage hits Manon's shield. Gold cloaks get trampled by the mob. Sandor Clegane vanishes. Aaron Centaur gets pulled from his horse. Balon Swan drops the king's standard and draws his sword, slashing left and right. A peasant stumbles in front of Joffrey, and he rides her down. And suddenly, the madness was behind them, and they were clattering across the cobbled square that fronted on the castle barbican. A land of spearmen held the gates. Sir Jacelyn was wheeling his lancers around for another charge. The spears parted to let the king's party pass under the portcullis. Pale red walls loomed up about them, reassuringly high, and a swarm with crossbowmen. And that is part 1 of A Clash of Kings Tyrion 9. Boy, this chapter, right? It's definitely my favorite half of a Tyrion chapter in A Clash of Kings, and I believe this is definitely my favorite Tyrion chapter in full in all of A Clash of Kings. What did you think of this chapter, Emmett?
Oh yeah, this is definitely my favorite Tyrion chapter in Clash, and maybe my favorite Tyrion chapter full stop, and you did a great job with it. As you say, it's got everything. The full range of George's talents brought to bear, from the big picture of the bread riots to the more intimate character moments that will determine how Tyrion interacts with that bigger picture. The thread that connects it all is catharsis, the arousal of pity and terror, a purgification both emotional and, in this case, literal. It is a confrontation in the public square with everything that has been denied, in multiple senses of that word. We've been building up to this chapter for quite a while with Riot Watch in the foreshadowing sections, a powder keg getting ready to burst. And now it has, all over the city and all over A Clash of Kings. The riot is the equivalent in Clash to Ned's downfall in Game of Thrones in the throne room, or the Red Wedding in the Storm of Swords. This isn't the climax of the book. That's still a ways off with the Battle of Blackwater, but this really kicks the book into roller coaster mode.
I think you're right about this not being the climax, but it's a moment of intense narrative payoff that's impossible for me to forget. I mean, Martin planted the seeds for the riot throughout the narrative that the city's hungry, the city's angry, the city doesn't like Lannisters. And I bullet point all the hashtag Riot Watch foreshadowing from earlier in Clash of Kings just for purposes of posterity for this episode. So Tyrion 1, city on the brink of starvation. Sansa 2, mentions of unrest and starvation in the city. Tyrion 3, the Gold Cloaks are foraging for food outside of King's Landing. Tyrion 4, food is not coming into the city. Sansa 3, Tyrion 5, Joffrey is crossbowing starving peasants. Tyrion 7, the small folk are down to eating cats. Tyrion 8, Littlefinger mentions how little food is available in the markets. And then a riot in this chapter. Setup and payoff. It's writing 101, folks. And I think what makes this especially good setup and payoff is how it fits organically into the framework of a story, which has the High Lords playing their Game of Thrones, preventing the small folk from attaining their reign, healthy children, and summer, as Jorah Mormont talked about. The small folk are striking back against their oppressors, and the loudest voices don't advocate Robb, Stannis, or even Renly, although their names are shouted. They don't even cry out against the Lannister regime so much. They scream for the most powerful king in the realm, King Bread.
Beautifully said, sir. It's easy to reduce Tyrion 9 in memory to that great, moment when the small folk speak as one, to the riot itself. But before we get to the fireworks factory, George focuses our attention on Myrcella's departure. On the surface, this is little more than a red herring for the chapter's purpose, to catch us off guard with the riot and so enhance the tension and excitement. But on reread, I began noticing all the ways this scene feeds in to what's about to happen and the larger themes and images that dominate Tyrion 9. On a literal level, there is no connection. It's not like the people are rioting because Myrcella is leaving or because they disapprove of the Dornish as during the Blackfire Rebellion days. If you think about it, however, this was guaranteed to happen whenever the royal family and all their hangers-on were coaxed out beyond the Red Keep at this point. After all, that's why Tyrion has sellswords scattered throughout the crowd. He was anticipating such a possibility, just not the size and scope of it. The reader is not alone in our awareness that you laid out so well that King's Landing is a powder keg on the verge of catharsis. Our POV character is very much aware of it because it's been going on in his chapters. Yet, they have to be here to see Myrcella off, to maintain their shadow on the wall. They have to pretend like nothing's wrong, otherwise there definitely will be. You have to act like the royal family in order to be the royal family. And yet, Tyrion 9, perhaps more than anything, is about what happens when the shadow fades, when the image falls apart, when political legitimacy dies. All the pretenses don't help. They don't change the raw material facts that outlive the shadows. You are starving, they are not, and they are all at last conveniently here where you can get at them. The Lannisters have pushed the narrative that they are in charge as far as they possibly can. And the catharsis of A Clash of Kings Tyrion 9 is that narrative busting apart. George builds this organizing principle, the face of power on the verge of breaking, into this chapter from the very beginning, from the opening words. The girl never wept. Young as she was, Myrcella Baratheon was a princess born. As you say, it's the one happy moment, and it all comes apart from there.
Right. Yeah.
Myrcella is keeping it all together in multiple senses. Like Robb at the beginning of Catelyn's POV in this book, she is hyper aware that all the world is a stage and she has the spotlight. She is the center of this perfect projected political tableau. Robb couldn't help but mess with his crown, nervous before the camera's gaze. Myrcella is pure poise, knowing all her lines and moves, a princess born. And yet, Tyrion can't help but think to himself that she's not a Baratheon, in truth. She is all Lannister. And there is so much pride and pain mixed into that sentiment. On the one hand, Tyrion clearly loves and is proud of Myrcella. Bronn will wish Tommen was the king later on in this chapter. Tyrion will toy with the idea of Myrcella as queen early on in A Dance with Dragons. When Tyrion thinks of Myrcella as being Jaime's blood, the secret daughter of the one relative he loves, for now, he is affirming their bond, and it's very sweet. But it is precisely that hidden parentage, that hidden connection, that is putting them all in danger from Stannis. It is that danger that haunts Tyrion's thoughts, preventing him from focusing purely on his pride and love for his niece. He's worried about what happens if Stannis should get his hands on the girl he called an abomination. She's a princess in actions, in the moment, in her bearing and temperament, but not in terms of her bloodline, in terms of the law. That which makes her precious to Tyrion is precisely what puts her in danger, and that is the truth behind that smiling mask.
Right. But it's also just one aspect of the law, as Dorne Martell is going to attempt to, not Dorne Martell, Arian Martell is attempted going to do the Dornish version of that the one who is born before Tommen is actually the one who's actually the heir. And as also Dorne and Arian point out repeatedly, Myrcella is very intelligent, seemingly very charming, and they like her, even though they're obviously conspiring to use her for their own political schemes. There is a genuine, I think, sense of that these two characters are think the world of her. And I'm kind of reminded of how George uses the Goldilocks formula to evaluate political leadership of Westeros. Have you ever noticed there's a lot of three children, just always three children, right? Stannis, Renly, Robert, Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, Jaime, Cersei, Tyrion, all that sort of stuff. I mean, I think it's also things we can go all the way back in history with Rhaenys and Visenya and Aegon, and Rhaenys being kind of overframing the fun times and loving her jests and her poetry and music, and Visenya was too warlike and focused on the harder things in life. And Aegon sort of struck the balance between these three siblings. And then we get to the next generation in history. Aenys was too soft, Maegor too cruel, and Jaehaera is just right, although Fire and Blood casts a lot of doubt on that, as we covered in our Fire and Blood episodes on Patreon. Renly was also too obsessed with image politics, Stannis too obsessed with the substance, and Robert had the balance of substance and style, at least initially during Robert's Rebellion. Pretty much fell apart after that. So too, now we focus on the Lannister kids. Joffrey is too cruel, Tommen too tractable, as everyone says, just likes to stamp shit, and Myrcella is just right. She just strikes that balance of strength and love, standing up to Joffrey during the name day tourney in Sansa's first chapter. One of my favorite moments in A Clash of Kings, as I read back to that a few days ago. And she's the one who is giving comfort to Tommen here. It's really a really touching moment that this girl, who is obviously not a Baratheon, very much a daughter of Cersei and Jaime, somehow turned out right, and somehow turned out to be much better than all of her peers and all of her adults really in her life. It's touching, sweet, and of course it makes it all the more tragic that she's doomed.
I think you're right. It's touching because it seems almost accidental. It seems to just happened on its own, but it's also just so fragile, and we know that even now. The one sign you get of that early on is that Myrcella's smile is, quote, a shade tremulous, a lovely term. It's the first crack in the glass, the flaw in the perfect portrait, the hint that it's all going to go wrong. Myrcella doesn't know it, but her parentage is the tremulous shade in the house of cards that is Lannister power. She embodies their strength and their weakness at the same time. George then checks in with the strategic side of Tyrion's mind, which is increasingly obsessed with Stannis since the news of Renly's death. Everything Tyrion sees makes him think of the true Baratheon heir coming to claim his throne and city from Cersei's children with fire and blood. Tyrion has taken sensible precautions. He has sent several strong ships. He has dispatched Eris Oakheart, one of the more trustworthy Kingsguard knights, to protect Myrcella, and he has engaged the services of Bravos to get her to Dorne, and that is a very cunning move. This is one example of how the pretense of power is still helping the Lannisters even as they slide toward what seems like certain defeat. They are the ones with the ability to make public alliances with Braavos. Stannis has more military power now, and he has quite the reputation to deal with for both better and worse, but he lacks the signifiers of power: the city, the treasury, the throne. Braavos does not respect his authority, not yet anyway. So Tyrion gets to use Braavosi power as a shield in order to get Myrcella to Dorne, acquiring more power there in turn.
I think of the things that you're mentioning, I think it's the control of the royal treasury, which is the chief shadow on the wall that the Braavosi are looking up to and saying, we want to support these guys. Because their power, that is the Lannisters' power of the purse, means that the Sea Lord, Braavos, and the Iron Bank will negotiate with them and lend them money. And this shared economic purpose between the Sea Lord and the Iron Bank, which isn't made explicit in any of the text, but is strongly hinted at, drives this bargain with the Lannisters as much as the vestments of power, the other ones that you were mentioning, do. The implication here is that the Lannisters are continuing to pay interest against the loans that Robert took out from the Iron Bank. And Robert, when I mean Robert, I say, of course, Littlefinger is what I actually mean. But as Jon notes in Dance of Dragons, once you prove financially untrustworthy to the Iron Bank, bad shit goes down. The Iron Bank of Braavos had a fearsome reputation when collecting debts. Each of the 9 free cities had its bank, and some had more than one, fighting over every coin like dogs over a bone. But the Iron Bank was richer and more powerful than all the rest combined. When princes defaulted on their debts to lesser banks, ruined bankers sold their wives and children to slavery and opened their own veins. When princes failed to repay the Iron Bank, new princes sprang up from nowhere and took the thrones. All that's to say is that in Braavos, the legitimizing political currency is, wait for it, currency. And when you aren't earning, it's Stannis time, baby.
Exactly, and that feeds so well into what Tyrion is dealing with here. He is positively humming with anxiety about elements beyond his control if the Lannisters should lose their legitimacy. About Stannis turning up at any moment, Tyrion is unable to feel secure in this power. Stannis has become a fearsome figure of dread and death in Tyrion's mind, just as he has in Catelyn's mind, his shadow casting long and dark over Westeros at war. And I get why, of course. Stannis poses a significant threat. But Tyrion isn't paying enough attention to the threat of the starving, riled-up smallfolk. He is so fixated on the horizon that he doesn't feel the ground falling away underneath him. And that sums up the overall mindset of people in power right now. With the occasional exception, like Edmure, they're so intent on getting at each other that they're barely paying any attention to everyone they're grinding under the wheels. When Tyrion does take note of the peasants, the laborers, everyone who constitutes the actual majority population of Westeros, it's only to dismiss them. He thinks that he doesn't care if the people building his winch towers are cursing his name, just as long as we get the job done, as long as we get the greater good. That's what I'm focused on. But then he's taken aback when Jocelyn Bywater says they hate him later in the chapter. And this is filtered, of course, as always, through his stature and how the world has treated him because of it. As part of this ceremony, this public performance of power, Tyrion must walk in public, or as he thinks of it, waddle. It's humiliating for him. No one laughs, although Tyrion thinks he knows they must want to. He feels them laughing on the inside anyway. And doesn't that so perfectly capture the futility of using power to fix the wounds we have taken? Tyrion now has the authority to make everyone shut up when he's around, but he can't silence the voice inside that tells him about their voices inside. In that projected space of learned abjection, Tyrion's power, his armor, does not help him.
Yeah, and I think that armor concept is so important to Tyrion. It's the advice it gives to Jon early on, and it's starting to kind of shift a little bit in Tyrion's mind. Because part of Tyrion's arc in A Song of Ice and Fire is how he's gradually becoming more like Tywin Lannister as the story progresses. He's now fearful of laughter and being laughed at. Considering how Tyrion laughs uproariously when Jon tells him that Ghost maybe thought he was a grumpkin back in the Game of Thrones, it's sad. I mean, it struck me as a little bit sad here. Now he's using laughter and mockery to win short-term advantage in his discussion with Alliser Thorne in Tyrion's 6th chapter. He's now using laughter as a weapon against other people. But if he's the one not dishing out the burns or being at the brunt of the laughter, he mistrusts it and sees it as a weapon to be used against him. There's no, quote, wear it like armor, Jon, at work with how Tyrion views his disability now. He's instead acting in a kind of early Jon Snow way and lashing out, even internally, at his own bullies. And when he has the opportunity, he compensates for his disadvantage, enjoying how high he looks when sitting the Iron Throne in Tyrion 6, and then eventually when he's atop his horse here in this chapter. As we talked about it, though, at length, Tyrion has refused to use his disability and also his underdog status to his advantage, and he'll continue to not use this to his advantage until his final moments of power at the Battle of the Blackwater, when people are shouting for half man there at the battle. And not using their status as underdogs is a defining feature of all of Tywin's kids.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It affects them all in different ways given their different relationships to power. Cersei goes through a similar process wherein even as she takes charge in her own right in A Feast for Crows, she is limited not only by what the world thinks of her as a woman, but also by what she thinks of herself as a woman, her internalized misogyny. We also see how Tyrion's power intersects with his disability when he considers why the small folk might be pissed off at him. Again, this is a concept he reacts to with shock and anger later on in the chapter because it's hatred relative to Joffrey, like even worse than they hate Joffrey, but he is calmer and aware of it now in his mind. They hate him because they are starving, he thinks to himself, whereas he is, quote, well-fed and ugly. The slippage there, wherein the small folk have one trait, starving, and he has two, well-fed and ugly, again perfectly summarizes Tyrion's worldview with just a few words. You could have easily said, they hate me because I am well-fed and they are starving, one-to-one. That's a simple enough concept to articulate, but Tyrion's thoughts intervene with, and ugly. He has so thoroughly internalized their hatred. His internal monologue just supplies what their words cannot. And he can't help but filter their suffering through that. They hate me in part because of the power structure I sit atop, that of wealth, that of the political hierarchy of Westeros, but also in part because of the power structure where I sit at the bottom, a convenient target, that of stature, that of the image of masculinity in this particular world. Both are true. Both power dynamics exist in this world, and that's what makes the politics of this moment so difficult to untangle. Tyrion is using political power to insulate him from the, quote, big people who have mocked him. And in turn, their bigotry is an excuse to ignore their starvation. From their perspective, they mock him because it's their only tool against him, because they're so powerless to affect change in any other area of their life. This combination produces alienation and resentment that makes a better world impossible. It's why we have to investigate multiple kinds of power and injustice. Tyrion has contextualized the rage of the small folk in a way that allows him to dismiss their importance, and his mind's eye goes right back to the labyrinthine power plays among the nobility, specifically regarding Cersei and the Kettleblack brothers. Cersei can perform power so easily in this scene, all smiles and flirtation, because behind the scenes, she has got herself a conspiracy cooking. I love the detail that Cersei meets with the Kettleblacks while pretending to visit the Sept of Baelor to pray for victory against Stannis and his new Red God. That sums up how the people in power are maintaining a mask of piety and humility and service, while in truth they are consumed with paranoia about one another and only think of other people as pawns to be used in a game that benefits very few. And it's all for nothing. Cersei thinks she's found a reliable source of power in the Kettleblacks, but they're taking Tyrion's money too. Tyrion thinks this puts him in charge, but he never stops to wonder if the Kettleblacks are conning him as well. They're making fierce but hollow booming sounds for Cersei, as he thinks. Well, what if that's all they're doing for him? What if they've told Cersei everything and have reassured her they're only feigning loyalty to Tyrion? Even as Tyrion proves more insightful than other members of his family and class about various subjects, he still has huge blind spots about his own use of power. The Kettleblacks end up choosing Cersei over Tyrion in this book, but we learn in A Storm of Swords that Littlefinger has been pulling their strings all along. Or so he thinks. The Kettleblacks will probably prove just as useless at best to Littlefinger as they were for the Lannisters. There is no substance, no true steel beneath their shell games. Like the stone cows of Karth, they are hollow drums all the way down.
Isn't that Littlefinger makes that note in A Feast for Crows in one of Sansa's chapters that the Kettleblacks are not really like cooperating with him anymore, even though it's like their father who helped to get them out of King's Landing, get Sansa out of there. And because we just did a whole 4-part series on Davos' second chapter, in which 3/4 of the chapter is Stannis castigating the Stormlords who are now a part of him, it did kind of strike me that the Kettleblacks kind of work as like kind of Lannister Stormlords, or even like the Karstarks in A Dance with Dragons attempting to play Stannis and the Boltons off against each other, and really just kind of half-assing it. Although the Kettleblacks seem a little bit smarter in that they are so far alive at the moment. Although, of course, there is that moment. Is it Osfrey is the one who goes to the High Septon and confesses to murdering the High Sparrow and confesses to murdering the High Septon previous to him? All this, yeah. So all the same, like these guys are playing like kind of a low cunning game at the moment. But when they actually start to advance in this world and they think they're actually going to make out with Cersei on top, sometimes literally, that means that that means that they're playing outside of their game. And you know, the Kettleblacks, for all of their Bluster are interesting characters, and they are a faction that George has mentioned several times as being important to the Winds of Winters. So I'm eager to see what's actually going to happen with them come Winds, given that George has mentioned them several times, and given that a lot of their fate is left open to what's going to happen with them in the wake of Cersei's trial by battle and Marjorie's trial by the faith.
I think that rise and fall dynamic is precisely the point. There is a perverse strength to this constant slipperiness and betrayal. In a Westeros at war, the shifting tides of power can make loyalty a fool's bet. It's the same reason Lord Swan sent his sons off to different sides of the war. Every side needs disavowable assets like the Kettleblacks, and so the Kettleblacks can draw paychecks from every side at once. But as with the Bloody Mummers, the war does eventually catch up with them when it comes to the Sparrow movement, and the Kettleblacks find out their sleazy liminal status offers them no long-term protection. Their name, of course, refers to the saying about the pot calling the kettle black. By working for everyone, they expose hypocrisy and corruption wherever they go. Tyrion and Cersei are dragging each other down into the shit, like Stannis and Renly did. The triple cross game with the Kettleblacks just highlights that. We see this blind spot at work when Tyrion is all agog at Joffrey's cruelty towards Sansa. He wonders how blind Cersei can be, whilst he himself is blind about the Kettleblacks. We all see what we choose to see, fooling ourselves into thinking that we're being the objective ones. And all these powerful folks are about to get a brutal lesson in that.
Yeah, and we go back to this kind of train of thought we've been talking about throughout Clash about in a perfect world, the Lannisters and the Baratheons would work together as kind of like the perfect like superhero team. You got Cersei's the beautiful queen, front of the house. Tyrion is back of the house, power behind the scenes. Jaime is optics of chivalry. He can do whatever. Joffrey is somehow not around in this imaginary scenario. Instead, all of the Lannisters scheme against each other, putting the Kettleblacks, playing the Kettleblacks off each other, against each other, and stab each other in the back. And I'm going to blame someone who deserves blame. It's all Tywin fucking Lannister's fault. His inability to be emotionally present in his children's lives, using his children in his political schemes, actively hating one of his kids, maybe even all of them, but specifically Tyrion. All of that toxic parenting has led to toxic relationships between the children. Whether they're fucking each other, wanting to fuck each other, scheming to murder each other, the imagined scenarios where they work together can't work because of the sins of the former generation of their parents. And wouldn't you know it, but the sins of the parents extends to yet another generation, right? It just seems to happen so often with these Lannisters.
Sadly, yes, those puppet strings go back and back, and they extend forward. They extend to the kids. It's so revealing that Joffrey thinks princes aren't supposed to cry, when he will conduct himself so poorly in public as a king as this chapter goes on. The masses don't really care about Tommen crying. They care about being starved and shat upon and killed by the king's pet thugs. That's what brings down Joffrey's legitimacy. Sansa Stark, blessed pure little nerd that she is, pipes up with her receipts from the stories and songs. There were, in fact, princes who cried. Specifically, they cry when their families fall apart, when Nerys wed Aegon IV, when twins turned on one another. And you can see the resonances with what's happening now. Jaime wept when Cersei wed Robert, and now Stannis and Renly, who are not twins but are brothers, and they have turned on one another. The image of the perfect, glittering, manly king gives way to the soft interior of us all, broken things that we are. The princes are crying on the inside. But the small folk are done crying on the inside where no one can see. This is a chapter about catharsis, and everything is about to come out into the open.
Just go on.
Sure. The royal procession sets out for the Red Keep, protected by a line of gold cloaks on either side, and George takes his time describing each rider in turn. This is not only to establish who is present and where they are, so as to preserve spatial coherence for the upcoming action scene. George is emphasizing the richness of the banners, the jewels Sansa is wearing, the overall beauty and refinement on display, as a contrast to the people of King's Landing, for whom all of that is kept at a distance. Not only that, but their taxes are paying for all that glittering refinery. A few are moved by the sight and call out for Joffrey, but most do not. They have seen through the con. They realize the corrupted nature of beauty I talked about in Dany 3. And ultimately, as Minnesota Governor Tom Walz said during the recent unrest in American cities, the authorities must reckon with how thoroughly they are outnumbered by the people they seek to control. Tyrion knows that the undercover cops he's planted among the potential rioters won't be enough to stop what's coming. Cersei has to know it too, but she pretends otherwise, playing the role of the happy, beautiful queen in order to be the shadow on the wall. It's about to fall apart. It falls apart not with a direct physical blow, but with a final attempt to force the Lannisters to reckon with what they have done to the people over whom they rule. A woman forces her way out into the street, holding her dead baby above her head. As abject and heartbreaking a sight of a starved infant is, George tells us that the real horror is the woman's eyes, and he really doesn't have to say anything more. The dead are at least at peace. As with Catelyn bearing witness to Ned's bones, the real horror is living on with the knowledge of what has been taken from you. This woman has to wake up every day and remember that her child starved to death because these rich assholes wouldn't share the scraps off their plates. Michael Brown in Ferguson was beyond pain when his body was left out in the sun for hours by the police who were protecting the killer, one of their own. But the people observing his body were not beyond pain. The pain was in their eyes, not his. Pain of living with the knowledge of your own exploitation. It is the hideously painful revelation that your life does not matter to the people who have the power to grant you mercy or punishment on a whim. The starvation of an infant is about as wretched a commentary on the failure of a society I can imagine. One that calls to mind Les Mis, that calls to mind Dostoevsky, and even some of the staging the scene calls to mind something like Do the Right Thing, a serious reckoning of public anger, of public fire in the square.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And unfortunately, I have to ask the uncomfortable question about whether this is an organic expression of sorrow by the small folk or potential mummery. And I know you're already shouting at me, and I appreciate your shouts. There is, as you're saying, real horror in what's occurring, no doubt. And I have zero doubt as well that children are among those who have died when the High Lords play the Game of Thrones and are literally, not figuratively, starving the city. It's just the timing of it all, the placement of the one with the dead child, the tossing of the shit. And yeah, so I guess here we go. Let me explain. So starting with the build up to the actual eruption. So here's the line. They crossed Fishmonger Square and rode along Muddy Way before turning onto the narrow curving hook to begin their climb up Aegon's high hill. So here we have the King's party moving uphill through a narrow curving street. Additionally, the windy aspect of the street ensures that visual contact cannot be maintained throughout the route. What this means is that once the front element crosses the bend in the road, they can't see what's happening towards the rear, and the rear can't see what's happening towards the front. So the party has to stretch out in order to keep moving or bunch up, and both options are bad. Stretching out negates the tactical advantage of massing together with gold cloaks, knights, and Kingsguard able to protect all members of the party, and bunching up also funnels the Lancer host, forcing most of the party to stop movement altogether and be caught with a hostile crowd all around them. So the party stretches out. I think that's probably the option that makes the most sense. They really have to keep moving as Tyrion is aware that the mood of the crowd is growing ugly and suspects Cersei's aware too, but putting on a brave face. And now we come to the event of the woman approaching the king. Let's find out where this occurs. Halfway along the route, a wailing woman forced her way between two watchmen and ran out onto the street in front of the king and his companions. Now, recalling the placement of the party or the order of march, so to speak, Joffrey's in the middle of the column moving forward, and now everyone gets stopped. To me, this kind of reads like a textbook ambush scenario. And the way I was taught in how to conduct ambushes was to wait for the enemy to be in the center, to strike, cutting off the front and rear of the column, and then defeating the enemy in detail. Now, I don't imagine that George R. Martin opened up a copy of FM 3-21.8 or FM 7-8, which was the actual manual that was in publication that time in the 90s. I don't know, I'm a nerd about this shit. And studied how ambushes are conducted. But it doesn't take a soldier to understand the site selection for stopping the column right where it does stop to spring a trap. So I will pause there because I know that's probably a little, just slightly controversial, right?
No, I think you laid that all out really well. And the question of whether or not this was deliberately staged for ambush purposes is one we will return to next week when we talk about Varys and Tyrek and get into the possible motivations for such a setup. I think, I mean this not in contrast to that really, but just kind of in addition to it, just from a slightly different angle. I think at some level, it doesn't really matter whether this particular woman is a paid agitator or not, or whether this was a setup in an ambush or not, because she does stand in, as you say, for the real suffering experienced by thousands. And oftentimes, you know, the presentation of such an event as staged is used as a fig leaf to deny that suffering. And we see that over and over again in current unrest in American cities and in countries like Israel, that you if you point to bad actors or if you point to even signs of organization at all, it gets, you know, presented as astroturf, and that's allowed to, you know, paper over the horrors potentially being done to these people. Oftentimes, police and intelligence agencies pay agitators in order to dismiss the concerns of genuine activists and paint them all with a negative brush. And I think we have this persistent idea of the platonic good suffering person in our head, and anyone who doesn't fit that image, their concerns become easier to dismiss. As if a starving, disenfranchised person is ever going to be an angel. You know, these are the conditions that produce revolutionaries, benign and otherwise. And that platonic ideal just doesn't really exist. It's such a myth that we have to invent one, and we have to break real living people down into them. So often, Martin Luther King's anti-war and anti-capitalist ideals, along with his belief that white moderates who prefer order to justice are the real obstacle to civil rights, are often left out of his image in favor of just the angle presented by the I Have a Dream speech shorn of context. Or look at Rosa Parks. How often is she described as just an ordinary woman who got fed up one day instead of an activist taking part in a deliberate long-term strategy? It's this flip side of the coin, I think, when the rebels are seen by the powerful and by the media as bad, then they are paid agitators. And when they become seen as good later on, well, then they were just ordinary folks all along, like you and me. And so there really is no model of upsetting the status quo that will be seen as legitimate by those benefiting from the status quo. And of course, I think, regardless of the particular status of this staging and of this woman, nothing forces Joffrey to respond like he does. He proves his own unworthiness as a leader. He demonstrates that the people are right to rise up against him in any form. First, he prepares to outright ride the woman down. Only Sansa Stark, again, let her, intervenes to save the woman's life. And so Joffrey then tosses coins down, and they scatter and roll, and everyone just fights over them. We saw the same thing at the Hand's tourney with Renly. Careless charity like this is just not enough to solve what's ailing King's Landing. And then Cersei steps in to try and paper this over one last time, putting on a show, as Tyrion says. Leave the poor thing alone. She is beyond our help. And yeah, so she is, but that's only because of the Lannisters' neglectful leadership. And now that bill has come due. It's time to pay the piper. That woman howls insults at Cersei, framing the twincest as the original sin that has infected everything, rendering King's Landing an unlivable hellscape. And then someone throws shit at Joffrey. Tyrion can't see who. In retrospect, I can't help but think of the man who threw a shoe at George W. Bush. And again, at some level, it is interesting to consider how much of this is being staged and arranged and how perfect it is and how calculated it is. And that's definitely an aspect of it. But at another level, it feels academic to me, whether it's a starving resident of Flea Bottom being paid by Varys or it's a starving resident of Flea Bottom who isn't being paid by Varys. The point is that they're starving, and the people in power are happy to manipulate them against each other as they continue to starve. And the point ultimately is how Joffrey reacts to it. Joffrey once more just casually tosses money around. 100 golden dragons to the man who gives up the shit flinger. I will never lift a finger to help you, but I will empty my treasury to punish you. Those are my priorities as your king, and it's a dynamic we are very familiar with in our modern United States. The cries to defund the police are in large part about a recognition that the seeming invulnerability of the police in legal justice terms has to do with the invulnerability of their money. And that's what's going on with the Lannisters here, that they're starving people. But when it comes to, randomly dealing with people who dare rebel against them, then suddenly money is no object for them. And Tyrion smells disaster in this moment, not because of the mob on its own, but because of how Joffrey is inciting the mob, proving the point. As always, Joffrey himself is the sticking point, preventing Tyrion from ever doing justice as he pledged. Joffrey orders Sandor to cut through the people on the streets in order to bring him the head of the man who threw the shit. Cut through dozens of people like they're wood. It's difficult to imagine a more comprehensive abandonment of governance. These are the possibilities of irresponsible power per Lord of the Flies. And again, even if this was a psyop by Varys to expose how unworthy a leader Joffrey is, it worked. The resulting anger is the most genuine thing there is. And when I first read this passage, my mind went to the treatment of freedom riders and other civil rights protesters in the 1960s. And now my mind goes to how police have treated those protesting against their violence in the modern day. The brutal facts of occupation cannot be waved away by zeroing in on suspect individuals. Every single person in that crowd could be paid to be there, and it doesn't change the fact that Joffrey unleashed his cops to break their heads. They are meat as far as he's concerned, not people. And all at once, Joffrey loses the consent of the governed, and the people rise up against him. But again, I totally agree that you make a great point that this is not. This is exactly the moment when you want to stop this procession. And I think there's a combination of calculation and chance at work, and I think it's really good to tease those out.
Well, you drive a really good point about how this. Even if this was every single person was an agitator in this crowd, a paid agitator, a George Soros plant, that they all would have been right to rise up anyways because Joffrey just proved himself completely unworthy of the leadership. And there's no argument that Joffrey is unfit to rule, and he demonstrates this with his 3 responses. 1, wanting to ride the woman down in the first place. 2, cursing, offering money to the person who threw shit at him, and then ordering Sandor Clegane to cut through the crowd and find the perpetrator of the shit strike. Now, I'm not arguing that the response to the small folk was inorganic or staged, because I really don't get that sense from this chapter. There has been a massive buildup of injustices and targeted deprivations of the small folk perpetuated by the ruling classes of Westeros. Classes, not just the Lannisters, that have led to the city erupting here. I think what I'm rather arguing is that the spark to cause the uprising at this particular location, in this particular tactically convenient spot, is convenient for someone to want to do it here. Not that it's inorganic at all, because I think it absolutely is organic. Because Joffrey reacted in the same manner as he operates throughout the narrative. He executes traitors back in the Game of Thrones. He orders people to fight to the death, and he fires crossbow bolts at starving peasants who come to the gates clamoring for bread. As you were saying, as you were saying, and we will one more time. As you were saying, we'll unpack more about Varys and Tyrek next time, but I'll just note here that before the riot starts, Tyrion thinks Varys himself was of doubtful loyalty. I rely too much on Varys, he reflected. I need my own informers. And Varys is not present among the royal column, as Jaime notes in A Storm of Swords. It is not easily found later in this chapter when Tyrion sends Podrick after him. Again, all fodder for discussion for next week when we have the discussion about Tyrek and Varys and stuff like that. I just figured I would just put the argument forward that at least one aspect of it was potentially planned and staged, but not the whole of it at all. 99.8% of it was not inorganic at all.
I think that's the right balance to strike. It's like a twig to unleash a flood, as like with Merry and Pippin in Fangorn Forest. And it needed any form to take, and I think that's what made it, open to precise shaping by the more calculating elements of King's Landing, because it was so obvious and because the powder keg was simmering. And so you get the bread riot of King's Landing. It takes the form of a rolling thunder, a storm of noise that engulfs the king's party, rage and fear and hatred given pure form. Those emotions simmering under the surface have been brought forth, from suspense to catharsis, a purgification in the public square, the world as a stage. Everyone gets pelted with insults, Joffrey, Cersei, and Tyrion alike. As I said earlier, the people use Tyrion's stature against him because it's their only advantage over him, and he, in turn, uses that to dismiss their desperation as invalid. Mixed in with the abuse, as Tyrion puts it, are more affirmative cries for a change in leadership, but there is no unity as to who should replace Joffrey and dispense the justice they are crying for. Some folks call for Stannis, the only remaining adult claimant for the Iron Throne, but others call for Robb, despite the fact that he's not claiming the throne at all. Others even call for Renly, despite his death. This shows the difficulty of organizing public anger in a specific concrete direction. Once more, that the small folk are legitimate in their anger, that they are right about a change in leadership being desperately needed, does not automatically organize them on its own. Opening the floodgates is necessary, but not sufficient. George uses the pressure cooker of the riot to expose the thorny, knotted nature of political change. The status quo is clearly unacceptable and has been clarified in this moment. But what will replace it? The proletariat has the power to completely reshape the world, but the existing hierarchies of power and cultural thought resist change even when their corruption is nakedly exposed. Imagination and organization are required and need to be kept up. The one thing everyone in this mob has in common, the one organizing principle that brought them all here, is that they are starving. Nothing inspires a rebellion like empty stomachs, and so the one king they believe in is King Bread. This is George doing some material analysis here, demonstrating that all the shadows on walls dominating a clash of kings fall apart in the ravenous face of hunger. Only now does the mob speak with one voice. We, the people, are dying, and we, the people, are not going to take it anymore. We want justice. We want bread. None of these kings matter to us, because as the Brotherhood argues, they are preying on us, depriving us of the sustenance we need to survive. They want to be left alone by Game of Thrones, but the Game of Thrones defines the context in which they live, and right now it is not letting them live. They know it, and so they rise up, not against the Lannisters, but against starvation. They rise against exploitation. They rise for freedom from want, the idea that society is supposed to be better than this and can be. This terrifies Tyrion more than the contradictory cries for one alternate faction or another. King Bread is ultimately a more potent challenge than King Robb or King Stannis.
A great point. And I think this right also reframes the riddle that Varys posed to Tyrion back in his first Clash chapter. In a room sit three great men, a king, a priest, and a rich man with his gold. Between them stands a sellsword, a little man of common birth and no great mind. Each of the great ones bids him slay the other two. Do it, says the king, for I am your lawful ruler. Do it, says the priest, for I command you in the names of the gods. Do it, says the rich man, and all this gold shall be yours. So tell me who lives and who dies. Here in this chapter, we have a king, a high septon, and plenty of rich assholes. And the little men, small folk, of common birth and no great mind have decided that they can kill all of them. As you've been saying really, really well in this chapter analysis, the grievances of the small folk and their turn to violence is somewhat justified, is at least a natural occurrence for what's been occurring to them throughout the narrative. It's not as though the Lannisters have been trying their best to feed the population, have been the victim of circumstance and bad luck here. And George goes out of his way to describe all of the lavish food that Tyrion eats within the walls of the Red Keep. Another example of how food porn can be an effective way of communicating class distinction, and how the wealth of the Lannisters immunizes them from the deprivations of starvation that's affecting hundreds of thousands of King's Landers. But it's not just the royal family who's eating well. Think back to Tyrion's 4th chapter, where Tyrion thinks that only a thin trickle of food was coming into King's Landing, most of it earmarked for castle and garrison. Prices had risen sickeningly high on the greens, roots, flour, and fruit, and Tyrion did not want to think about what sorts of flesh might be going into the kettles of the pot shops down in Flea Bottom. These gold cloaks, red cloaks, knights, Kingsguard knights, lords, the ones who are holding the line for Joffrey, are all fed at the expense of the population that starves around them. Now, in Tyrion's mind, his sole interest is in holding King's Landing against Stannis, so of course he has to prioritize those who would man the gates, walls, and ships that defend the capital. And we should never forget that the city is being starved in small part because the Riverlands are a battlefield and unable to ship food to the city, and in a larger part because Renly and the Tyrell strategy is to block food shipments to the city as a deliberate strategy to weaken the Lannisters politically and militarily, using starvation as a weapon. But as we point out in our analyses of Tyrion's class chapters, Tyrion is propping up a lawless regime who continues to perpetuate their further lawlessness and atrocity on the small folk. So the small folk of King's Landing say, fuck this shit and fuck you for causing this shit. It's a completely natural, and I would argue justified, reaction by the small folk here.
Agreed. And so seeing the mob united as one stomach, speaking with that one voice, telling him to fuck off, Tyrion decides it's time to cut and run. And at this point, the scene explodes into chaos. Fragments of images fly by as though being captured in the shaky cam of a documentarian on the scene, and we are very familiar with such images these days. Rocks and vegetables are flying at the king's party. Hands flash out from the crowd only to explode into blood and screams as the swords flash down. Gold cloaks go down under the sheer weight of humanity. Sandor is just suddenly gone, his horse running riderless. Aaron Santagar is seen being pulled from his horse. Amidst the cacophony, one image stands out as representative of the whole. Balon Swan drops the Lannister banner in order to defend himself, and the banner is promptly ripped to shreds. Ragged crimson leaves in the storm wind, as George puts it. And that is what's happening in this scene. The people have stepped outside Plato's cave and seen that Lannister power does not actually indicate the glory of God bestowed upon the rightful rulers of Westeros. This banner is just fabric, and it can be torn apart. Again, George is going full materialist on us here. We have looked behind the curtain and seen that the great and powerful Oz is just a man, and so can be overthrown. This is what the failure of power looks like. When the image of power fails, when the fig leaf of righteousness and consent gives way to fire and blood, the only way power has of sustaining itself is force. Joffrey rides right over someone, and Tyrion couldn't even say whether it was man, woman, or child. They are all dehumanized, fully, just a blur of rage and hunger to him. And then suddenly they're inside, the walls rising up reassuringly, crossbowmen guarding their retreat, the noise giving way, the people kept back. But all this power suddenly seems so much more fragile now. There's no going back inside the cave, back into the Matrix. A challenge has been made. How to answer it?
And you're going to be really surprised by this, but the Lannisters really don't take the lessons of all of their near-death experiences beyond, wow, the Poors are awful angry. Why is that? Now, Tyrion, being Tyrion, will recognize how unpopular his family is, and he knows it already as he discusses in conversation with Sir Jacelyn Bywater in the latter part of this chapter we'll cover next week. But there's not going to be any meaningful reform introduced by Joffrey, Cersei, and Tyrion. No equitable distribution of food that comes into King's Landing, the little that does come in. And this is a big problem for the Lannisters, because when help finally does arrive at the Blackwater, it's in the form of the Tyrells shipping food by wagon load into the city after, of course, they starve the city. I'm just going to bring that up over and over again. The Tyrells then quickly win the love of the Commons, as Tyrion notes in A Storm of Swords, and Cersei grows paranoid about in A Feast for Crows. So the Lannisters learn nothing. And though the Lannisters still hold King's Landing by the end of A Dance with Dragons, sort of, and there's been no further riot in King's Landing since then, the small folk continue to despise the Lannisters and will shrug them off for the next best thing.
Yeah, we're going to see that develop for sure. We already see that kind of develop under the surface with the Sparrow movement, and a certain other claimant landing in the Stormlands will give them the opportunity to do so. But speaking of things to come later in the series, moving on to foreshadowing and groundwork, Tyrion is continuing to prepare for the Battle of Blackwater just outside the reader's awareness, building winch towers to lower and raise his chain. George, as usual, is just distracting us with so many other things going on in the plot and in Tyrion's inner monologue that the reader is not going to fixate on this as super important and wonder what's going on, thus preserving the surprise when that chain closes behind the Baratheon fleet, the wildfire hits, and the mouth of the Blackwater Rush becomes the mouth of hell, as Davos puts it.
I think it's really fun about the chain itself is that we think so far in the narrative that this is going to be used to block Stannis' fleet from entering Blackwater Bay itself. It's almost like the surprise isn't in like sort of like a Shadow Baby. Similarly, the surprise isn't that the chain is going to be used; it's how the chain is actually going to be used in the Battle of the Blackwater, which makes all of the work that Tyrion is putting into this much more effective and a great surprise for the reader when we come to the end of a Clash of Kings and the end of really the start of the Battle of Blackwater.
It's
second point. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's such a gut punch. Absolutely. But keep going. Yeah.
So great. And then second point of foreshadowing groundwork is that Tyrion is more right than he knows when he says that the Tyrells would rather have Joffrey dead than let him harm Marjorie. And the thing that I was kind of musing about a little bit in this chapter was whether Olenna Tyrell was really imagined in George's mind as he's thinking about this, or whether he planned for Mace to kind of assume the Olenna role, because we don't really encounter Mace Tyrell at all in the narrative. We know that his son, we know Loras, of course, because he's been in the narrative so far, but Mace doesn't turn up until A Storm of Swords, and he's way overshadowed by his mother, who ends up being the one who definitely ensures that Joffrey dies rather than have sex with Marjorie Tyrell.
That's a good question. I think the Tyrells probably just, exist as a vague collective in George's mind, and he's thinking more and more about them as he goes. Who knows if he's hit on Olenna yet? You think if he had, he might be doing some work specifically to build up her, and the way he builds up like Mance or Stannis for that matter, or Marwyn the Mage. So I think at this point, as they often are in the narrative itself, they're just kind of a collective, just a general rose bush hovering in the background. But I'm sure he's already got in mind that they're going to be the ones ultimately to kill Joffrey. That seems because we have that built up at the end of the book with the hairnet from Dantos, of course. So moving on up into the discussion section of the episode. It's kind of an open-ended question to pose, obviously, and it's not one it's really possible to fully answer. But this chapter, I think, kind of demands one think about what justice for the Lannisters from the people would really look like, and what would be done if the riot was successful in tearing down everyone in this party and ruling over the Red Keep. What would be next? Are we talking like a Gaiman Pale Hair 2.0 kind of thing when there was that uprising that led to a brief small full control of part of the city at least? If so, how would you kind of protect those gains for the long term? And if not, what would that model of justice look like?
It's a really kind of a tough question to answer, because we saw a version of the justice that the Lancers receive in the form of Tyrion being arrested for falsely killing Joffrey. Joffrey, of course, being murdered kind of hideously, given all the terrible things that he does, and Cersei being marched naked through the streets of King's Landing. That is the justice that the Lancers receive for the terrible things that they do in the book so far, and of course Jaime losing his hand too somewhere down the road. But is that actually justice, or is that more vengeance being visited upon the Lannisters for what they've done? I think we get a sense from George that what happens to all of the Lannisters, the punishment doesn't fit the crimes that they've committed, and kind of spills out into something that's a bit not good for the city of King's Landing, and of course not good for the characters for sure in the narrative. Now, like, I think gaming Pale Hair and having like the small folk control a part of the city is an interesting dynamic. It's something that George explored pretty deftly, I think, in Fire and Blood Volume 1. And I think it's interesting that we have Gaiman Pale Hair actually surviving all of that. Actually, at the end of Fire and Blood, at the end of the Dance of the Dragons, he becomes Aegon III's companion, and he is like his only friend. I could see that being a potential model for justice, of having someone being reduced from their status as being a ruler in the city, but still surviving and maintaining a place of kind of honor, kind of surviving and in a way, and continue to eat. That seems like a good thing for a small folk person to have, is to survive and eat and everything like that. But I don't know. I have a hard time like imagining like what justice actually looks like for the Lannisters, and trying to think of it too, like in a specifically Westerosi context. It makes it really kind of tough, right? Because I mean, would you want to have all of these Lannisters executed the same way that Ned Stark was? I'm not sure if that's also the right move either. What do you think?
I'm conflicted in terms of what the alternate power base for the Lannisters should be, because part of me thinks, again, my love of the Brotherhood under Beric, part of me thinks that they should try to throw off any and all kings at this point, take advantage of the fractured nature of power in Westeros to try to just get rid of that class entirely. And in order to really seize King's Landing for the long term, in order to try to start to accomplish that, you need to get rid of just not the people in the King's Party, but also like everyone Littlefinger has hired. Right. And you need to take over the means of production in King's Landing long term, not just to feed the people immediately, but to have a power base to draw from when one or more of the kings comes to challenge your control of the city. And because, if as what happened with Game and Palehair, if you declare yourself free of all the claimants, you become the enemy of all the claimants too. So no side, winning over the other is going to be good for your new revolution. And so another part of me thinks that maybe, using one of the other kings as a vessel and trying to gain some leverage over them is the best move. That declaring for Stannis, because, Stannis, even if he takes King's Landing, is going to have a small army, and maybe trying to, work with him for support, or, gain some policies out of him in return for populist support might be a move, again, just to start with in King's Landing. Or, supporting Robb, as much as I was making fun of it earlier, he's a convenient organizing tool, and you could potentially use him for like an Hour of the Wolf situation, which you get Robb to come down to wipe out the people and entrench power in King's Landing and set some better policies in place, and then just leave. That could be ideal if you managed it properly. Even Renly, we see what a useful organizing principle dead Renly is at the Blackwater, and we see what a useful organizing principle dead Robert is for the Brotherhood. So just say, we're doing this in honor of dead Renly, who believes whatever we say he believed, because he's dead and can't contradict us. So we're going to pretend that Renly's whole thing was feeding us, and we're going to organize anything to organize yourself. I think would be really useful in this moment, even if it's kind of bullshit, even if it's another shadow on a wall, whatever gets you to the point of actually taking over the bread of King's Landing and all that goes with it. Because I think that's how you ultimately, because just wiping out the Lannisters is just, in the same way that Arya helped take Harrenhal away from the Lannister men, away from Amory Lorch, but gave it to Roose Bolton. Right. Yay. Yeah. Oh, good. Now Harrenhal is better. It's not. So you have to confront that question. And so half of me is kind of romantically attached to the idea of declaring, independence from all the kings at once. And part of me thinks, like, if you get rid of the Lannisters, if you bring Shock and all to the status quo, how can you fiendishly, cleverishly leverage support for one of the other claimants in order to get what you want? In order to just not prevent your revolution from dying out from just one of the other kings coming to get you. You know what I mean? You have to somehow incorporate that.
Yeah, and I think that's sounds good to me. I mean, I'm all aboard having some sort of organizing principle so that people don't starve to death in King's Landing. It seems like a generally a societal good. I think the issue is, as I think you're putting out, is that it just is not just the Lannisters, right? It's also all of the ruling class of Westeros, from the Baratheons, the Lannisters, even the Starks to some extent, are all benefiting from this system. And they're also the ones that hold the swords in this system as well. So Gaemon Palehair's regime lasted not that long, because those who had swords and those who had dragons were able to come in and essentially end his pretensions to ruling. And I think that there is an aspect to where, I mean, I'm a good Republican, small r, in that I believe that monarchy has to go in the long term, and that's one of the aspects of reforming the system of having a distribution of political power out from a very small minority of the citizenry and having it dispensed down to all the parts of the citizenry. Again, is that something that's likely going to happen in Westeros? No. I mean, Game of Thrones season 8 even had them laughing about this idea of democracy when Samuel Tarly proposes it at that very small council scene at the end of season 8. But True. I do think but I think that there's an aspect where a gradual, slow revolution, which introduces democratic principles to Westeros and eventually leads to a better, more equitable distribution of goods and services, and especially food, would be for the betterment of the realm. And that just doesn't mean just lopping off the heads of every single Lannister as well, because there's always going to be another ruling class that will take over, as we're going to find out very quickly here as Stannis attempts it, and then likely Aegon the Sixth and the Golden Company will then be the ones who be the inheritors of the small folk rage and the support, and gain the support of the Sparrows. But are they actually going to be better than the Lannisters? They probably won't have the time really to distinguish themselves, given that Daenerys is coming right after them. But
true, probably not. But yeah, I mean, it's part of me thinks like you need a smash and grab at the start of that process to convince the powerful you're serious. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
the small folk need to, if there's going to be any kind of bargaining position, if that's ever really going to happen, the small folk need to do so from a position of relative power. And I think that's something the High Sparrow, although I don't agree with him on everything, I think that's something he understands. Like, before we even get to the table, you need to know we mean business. And, you know, the small folk occupying King's Landing, even temporarily, I think is a way to make that clear. And maybe that would send a signal to Stannis that, okay, I do need to, maybe I'm not giving up all my rights and privileges, but I need to guarantee bread. Even if it's not, you know, democratic reforms might be farther off than just a food guarantee. You know what I mean? Like, even just like a more equitable sharing of resources, even if political power stays the same, like we guarantee every citizen King's Landing gets this much bread every day. That might be within reach with a kindlier monarch from the Lannisters. And that might be a springboard for further reforms, because like I was saying, hunger is a great spark for a rebellion, but hungry people, it's just hard to come up with plans and reforms and new government associations when like you don't have any meals in your stomach. Like, you can't do it. So I think achieving that groundwork, I think, is something that might be more realistic than really breaking down the government. But I think a lot of that would go hand in hand. And I don't think any of that is forthcoming within the series. But it's an interesting thought experiment, just because this is one of the chapters in the series where possibilities like that kind of coalesce, and just you glimpse them just in passing, if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. You can see the potential for a better system emerging, even amidst all of this violence, all of this justified violence. And we can hope at some level, hundreds of years down the road for Westeros, that they have a better system than the one they have now. It's not looking good, though, for this series, though, unfortunately.
Well, there's that quote from Middlemarch that, you know, that so much of what we enjoy now is, you know, due to the labors of people who led hidden lives who aren't remembered. And I could see that being part of, you know, the history of Westeros, that if people of King's Landing have, you know, are politically organized in a way that brings them better lives years down the road, maybe the seeds were sown from that without anyone even knowing it. And just the process of time moves forward. And I could absolutely see that, even if it doesn't come through now. And we're going to, of course, talk much more next week about how it doesn't quite come true.
I am very much looking forward to next week as we talk about the Butcher's Bill from this event in King's Landing and what it means for the long term for the Lannisters, and especially when we get to Tyrek and Varys and everything like that. It's going to be a whole lot of fun. And I think that about wraps us up for this analysis on A Clash of Kings Tyrion 9 Part 1. As always, thank you so much for listening, and thank you to our patrons for supporting us. If you all have the chance, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Podbean, Spotify, anywhere and everywhere where you find our podcasts.
You can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/notacastASOIAF. You can follow us on Twitter at notacastASOIAF, or shoot us an email at notacastASOIAF@gmail.com. You can find me at PoorQuentin on Twitter or at PoorQuentin.com.
And you can find me at Brendan Beefish on Twitter, Brendan Beefish on Reddit, and my website is warsandpoliticsviceandfire.wordpress.com.
We want to shout out and thank our high lords and ladies on Patreon. Red Ralou himself, who has renounced his allegiance to the Squishers. Lady of 1,000 Words, Septon Eastwood of Introvert Isle. Septon Marybald, the Shoeless Sage. Sister Winter, Lady of the Wolfswood. Nessie the Elusive, Warden of the Neck, Defender of the North, and Keeper of Secrets. Sandy the Dragon, Blood of Queen Daenerys, and Lady of Jameson. Lady Britt, Bastard Mistress of Harrenhal. Sir Thomas, the Raven Knight, Lord of Blackwood. Lady Dillsdale, the Star Spear of Crescent Hill. Sir Way, of course. Matt, Warden of the Sanguine Shore. Lord Mark Cunnington, Heir to Griffin's Roost. Lord Sam Kay, Sir Michael Mertens. Wisdom Benjicott, Alchemist of Sets and Quanta, Mage of the Arts of Bool and de Morgan. Tibbs the Great of House Catnapping. Lord J. Manderley, Baker of the Frey Pies. Septon Merriful, Head of Hair. Lady Silverwing, Joe Snow, King of the Metro North and Protector of the Tri-State. Kaboth the Unfrozen, Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light. Sir Keith of House Corbray, wielder of Lady Forlorn. Lord Andrew, Warden of the Dubai Sands. And Ryan Noy, forger of the Mighty Hammer and keeper of the King's Anvil. Thank you so much, as always, to our high lords and ladies.
Yeah, thank you very much for all your support. It means a lot to us. Again, just hitting 1,000 patrons was very gratifying, and thank you very, very much. So join us next week for part 2 of this chapter, A Clash of Kings Tyrion Night, in which Tyrion slaps Joffrey, Sanders saves Sansa, and the Lannisters barely hold a city that fucking hates them. It's going to be so much fun.
As much as I enjoyed going through this part of the chapter with you, sir, I think the second part of the chapter is even more depthful than the riot itself. We get an incredible scene afterwards with all these dilapidated members of the King's Party trying to take control, and then Tyrion just reckoning with his lack of control. It's a perfect way to close out this chapter.
It's so much fun. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next week. I should mention, are you good sticking around for a little bit to answer some questions and everything like that?
Oh yeah, I'm good.
Cool. Sorry, I forgot to. I always usually say that when we do when we get to the closing part of it, but I just forgot, slipped my mind this time.
Yeah, no worries. I'm here.
Yeah, we'll stick around. We're here. Yeah, I know we're not going anywhere. All of us are still quarantined.
True.
All right. How's everybody doing? Everybody good? Staying healthy and everything?
Hope we're all well. I saw Zach from Game of Owns and Haley from Manimals over the weekend. Lovely. They're among my favorite people.
That's why you have that beautiful tone makeup going on now.
Yeah, right. Exactly. This is I hid from the sun like Joshua York, or like Gollum from the Yellow Face. He hates it. But no, it was wonderful to get out to the beach a little bit and still, stay away from everybody.
Yeah, it's always good to stay away from people.
True. I agree.
Mickback asks, why is Tyrion more defiant of Joffrey in the show? For example given, in the books at the Purple Wedding, Tyrion knelt when Joffrey ordered him to, and the show he didn't.
Making Peter Dinklage more, I don't know if likable is really the word, but more kind of wish fulfillment-y for the audience, in terms of saying more often what the audience would like to say to Joffrey, I guess, would be and also just because you don't have his inner monologue. So I think you have to get his defiance out through words more frequently, would be my guess.
Yeah, I think it's important for the show to demonstrate something, because we don't have Tyrion's monologue, inner monologue rather, in the show. So it helps to communicate things visually in a visual medium to change some of those aspects of Tyrion, especially like him like not kneeling. Like, it shows the defiance that he has for Joffrey. It helps to make the point much more clear, and also it provides subtextually provides that rationale why the Lannisters, or why everyone thinks that Tyrion did it, because he's obviously defying the king, and so he's like, well, if you defy the king, obviously you can poison the king too. So yeah,
true, good point.
Yeah, they have to communicate. Things have to be communicated differently in visual means. That's not to say that the show does not whitewash Tyrion or sanitize some of his worst behavior, but we've dealt with that.
But no, you're right. There's also a logic to it, for sure.
Micah asks, how are you guys doing today?
Oh, quite well, thank you, Micah. I'm okay. I made some steak and roasted potatoes and salad for Chloe. That was tasty.
Oh,
and it was nice to see my cats after being away from them for a couple days. And
do they act like they miss you when you return back, or they like act?
They were really
get like passive aggressive?
They were really frantic and running around, and then they ignored us for a bit, and then they got cuddly. So full range of emotions. Those little dust bunnies. How about you?
I'm fine. I kind of spent half the day working and half the day spending it with the girls. We went out to the playground, which was fun. Well, the girls, we saw a couple fishermen we live by the water, so we saw a couple fishermen, and one fisherman caught a fish, and my daughters were extremely excited by the fish that was being caught, even though it was a teeny tiny little minnow like that big. So it was adorable. Like them. Yeah, it was good. It was a good day. I had pasta for dinner, whole wheat pasta. Very, very healthy. Yeah.
Well,
Lots of veggies.
Aren't you fit?
Not really. Okay, here's a question. What would you rename the Washington football team?
I don't know, man. I'm glad. I'm really glad they're changing it, but I'm hopeless to conceive of what a better version of it. Like, part of me is like, name it something much more respectful to Native American people. Part of me feels like any version of that is going to be condescending too. Part of me feels like football's blood sport. Just stop. I don't know. I really don't know. What do you think?
I mean, as you remember the Onion headline, I won't say the full one, but the Washington team renames themselves to the DC, that name of the team that it is right now.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. The Senators, maybe, I guess. I don't.
Yeah, right.
I think like the problems with the Washington Redskins go deeper than the team name.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's inherently a positive thing. I just, I'm just imagining the PR people going, what will they accept? What would, like, there's just no genuine feeling involved with that.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know. It's hard. I'm sure, but again, I'm sure there are people who, have thought long and deeply about this and have good ideas. I'm sure they're out there. I just don't know who they are.
I mean, they can always reach out to Native American tribes and ask them for their input and just have them elect a team name. I think that would be cool.
But that would be great. I agree.
Sir Frank B asks, was Varys angling to kidnap Sansa along with Tyrek, but Sandor intervened or nah? Tune in next week.
Exactly.
I never even considered that. Have you heard that theory?
Obviously, if Varys really is, kicking things off here, he has to know that a certain amount of this is going to be out of his hands and out of his control. Kidnapping a couple people at a time I don't see the effort being put in with Sansa, really. If so, he failed really miserably, and Sansa is a significant person to risk. So I lean no on that count. I think he probably had other plans for Sansa, but we can talk more about it next week.
Yeah, I think I lean no as well. I think that he wasn't looking for a target that big, because as we're going to find out, they do look for Tyrek, but it's not like they have like the entirety of the Gold Cloaks like hunting the streets of King's Landing to find this kid. That would definitely spur a response from everyone to try and get Sansa back, because Tyrion would be in charge, and he's obviously interested in bringing Jaime free. And he realized that Sansa's his only token in order to do that. So yeah, we'll see. Clint, who is absolutely not a spy, says, which POV character would do best in quarantine and which would do worst?
That's interesting. I think Dampere would be probably fine in quarantine.
Well, he has kind of been in quarantine for however many months he's been there.
Exactly. Theon knows quarantine all too well. But I'm sure Davos would be fine. He would probably just sit there and like think quietly about how Stannis is good. He's Davos.
That's what he does when he's in the dungeons.
When he has time for himself, he thinks, the king.
Yeah, I hope he's doing okay.
There's when the King of the Hill episode where Hank has to go to a Renaissance fair to try to get their their business for propane, and the king of the Renaissance fair wants Peggy to work in the fair. So Hank just goes to Peggy and says, Peggy, guess who has a job for you in his kingdom? The king. And that's Davos going anywhere. Guess who has a job for you in his kingdom, Manderleys? The king does. Isn't that nice? Davos would do fine. So who would do worst? I don't know. Who do you think? Who would do terrible in quarantine?
Cersei would probably do terrible in quarantine.
She does not like it when no one obviously likes being thrown in jail.
She's like screaming and like shouting like when she's like being held by the High Sparrow and shouting herself hoarse. And so, I don't think she would do that well.
True. She would violate it immediately.
Yeah, she would be done. I think best, probably Davos would probably do best, because he does best when he is in quarantine, when he's in the dungeons of Dragonstone.
He handles himself quite well. He's quite used to being confined, unfortunately.
Yeah, but that's that, and he's also he does really well when he's quarantined in the Merman's Court too, in the Wolf's Den. He
just keeps getting thrown in jail again. He's the first chapter in Skagos is going to open with him just being in Unicorn jail, guarded by a unicorn with like little police cap that they have over in Skagos.
It's gonna be great. Yeah,
exactly. It'll be adorable.
Alex R. asks, first time, long time. Who do you guys think Ned and Joff would have called respectively if Ned called for trial by combat? Guessing the Hound or Jaime for Joff. Excuse me. Guessing Hound or Jaime for Joff and Great John for Ned since his leg broke.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, Varys is kind of there to push Ned towards confessing immediately, and thus kind of circumventing the need for that. But yeah, I mean, Cersei wants to push for a very quick end to this, so it's difficult to imagine I mean, yeah, I don't know what she does if Ned gets to deceptive Baylor and calls for trial by combat on the spot.
Yeah.
That's a very thorny situation. What do you think would happen?
Well, I think Ned would probably offer himself and would try to lose, right? Because the entire idea is that he's there to try and save Sansa's life because Varys specifically threatens
Right.
Sansa's life. So, and that's the only reason why he breaks, because he says, yeah, I've known what it means to die for a long time. And
Sure.
it's done really well in the show where he talks about, I've been around soldiers my entire life. I know I'm going to die at some point. But then Varys breaks him by saying, well, you might be okay with dying, but what about Sansa? So Ned seemingly already has done that bit of saying he's not going to resist. Sure. So he's dies to save Sansa's life. So I imagine he would do that again. I some of these AU situations, I feel as though they wouldn't be the story that we had if like Ned says, "Oh, I demand a trial by battle," because that would just kind of ruin the flow of the story of his
sure
sacrifice on behalf of Sansa Stark there. So
it'd be interesting to call the bluff because I don't really think Cersei actually would execute Sansa at this point. I think Varys was probably bullshitting Ned. So it'd be interesting to see him try to push that. But yeah, at that point, he's on the way out for sure.
Yep. Warren says, how evident do you think Tyrion's future descent is at this point? Now we have a little bit of a disagreement because you think that Tyrion's going to be redeemed towards the end, right? Or have you changed your mind about that?
Redeemed is the right word, but I think as we saw in season 8 of the show, I think Tyrion is going to probably end up. I think George's final notes towards Tyrion are going to be ones of rueful affection. Is how I'll choose to put it. I don't think. And this is where I do have some disagreement with some people in the fandom. I don't think we're headed for a straight up like, oh, Tyrion really was, Tony Soprano the whole time. I don't think it's quite that. At least in terms of the ending, I think there's going to be some bittersweetness there. I think Tyrion, I don't think it's a future descent at this point. I think Tyrion's in the descent mode. I think what happens to Dany, I think, is going to be a shocking revelation for Tyrion. And I don't know if that's going to come quickly enough for him to pull back in any concrete way, but I don't think...
Let me ask you this. Let me reframe it this way. So I think Dany's, I think we both think that Dany's will likely be the one to burn King's Landing in the books, as we saw in the show. How that actually comes about, it will likely be a different trajectory of events. Do you think that Tyrion will be the one to advise Jon to try and kill Dany afterwards, similar to what we saw in the show? And will he do it out of this? I mean, let's hope he doesn't invoke Niebuhr as he did in the show. But will it be for altruistic reasons, or do you think it'll be more cynical reasons that Tyrion might try that way?
I think he might do it to ease his own conscience more than anything else. Which I think was also present in the show. Again, yeah, I don't think Tyrion is going to be framed on the same level as Brienne or Davos or something in that vein at the end of the story. But I think his final moves in the story will be attempts to, in some way, make up for the horror he's committing himself to. And I think it's entirely possible that, as he says in the show, he doesn't even really know if he's actually doing the right thing or if he's just making things worse. So I think that might end up being the tone of it as well. But yeah. So that's I think Tyrion will realize what he's done by the end. I don't think he will go unknowing into the dark. That's how I'll put it. I don't think he's going to be completely delusional at the end of the story.
I mean, I think for an arc, he has to reckon with his past misdeeds, and he has to see the destruction of a city and be like, "Oh my God, this is actually terrible, what I was potentially advocating Daenerys to do." It's kind of it has to be one of those moments of not catharsis, what's the word I'm looking for, of just close to apotheosis in terms of what he's experiencing in that moment.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I don't think he's going to go out like Tywin went dying. His last words were, "Fuck you, I'm perfect."
Right.
I made zero mistakes and everything was your fault, Tyrion. And I don't think Tyrion's going to end the story with that attitude. That's what I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, we go from that heavy question to a nice one. Caitlin asks, what are your cats' names?
Our cats' names are officially Alysanne and Jaehaerys, named after the Targaryen couple, but really practically they're Ellie and Jake, because those are just easier to say. They're cute. Jake is skinny and weird and very full of himself, and Allie is a classic, just round bowl of yogurt and mutt cat who just wants affection. So they're a good pair. I love them dearly.
I can't wait to meet them. Someday I'm going to meet those cats. So
Allie will love you. Jake is skittish around people, but he'll come out eventually.
Well, I will appreciate meeting them because that'll be a lot of fun. Joshmo asks, Jeff, what is your favorite battle drill? Battle drill 6. You can look it up online. It's entering a room and clearing it. It's yeah.
All right.
McMag asks, have you watched HBO Succession? If yes, how do you think the Roy family compares to the Lannisters? I just finished season 1 and they're so unlikable. Cersei earns my sympathy more than any of them. Have you watched Succession yet? I told you to watch it like a year ago.
I've watched bits and pieces because someone in my family was watching it, but I have to go back and give it a whole watch. I was watching some episodes with them just for fun, and I really like what I see. And yeah, what do you think about that comparison?
I think it's really, really spot on. The Roy family being the Lannisters. I think I said something about that on Twitter a while back, but it's a little different in that. So Logan Roy, the family patriarch, is very much Tywin in terms of his nature. Although it's Tywin like in like the early stages of dementia and stuff like that, is from what we can tell. And then the other Kendall is kind of like Jaime-ish, and Shiv is like a smart Cersei. I mean, Cersei in the book. I mean, Shiv is basically like show Cersei.
Yeah,
I guess
I get that sense. Yeah, absolutely.
Because show Cersei is much smarter than books. Cersei thinks that she's really smart in the books when she's actually quite not that way. And then the youngest Roy, whose name I'm forgetting off the top of my head, very much Tyrion-esque and very actually smart and and not seen by the rest of the family as being bright or intelligent, but kind of like pulls himself out. It's also very caustic and profane and stuff like that, very Tyrion-esque.
Sure.
So I find the Roy family incredibly unlikable. They're so fucking unlikable. The only one I actually like, and I know Clint, I don't know if he's still in the chat or whatnot, but the one Roy who's the oldest son who lives out in like New Mexico or something like that, his girlfriend / mistress, she's the only character I actually like in the show, but it's still incredibly watchable and the music is outstanding. And
yeah, absolutely,
it's so good. Yeah. And then Clint brings up that the Kendall Roy rap was worse than being shot with a crossbow bolt. Yeah, true that. Yeah, that was a moment of hideous shrinking away from the television watching that. So when you watch that in season 2, Emmett, you'll know exactly what we mean by that.
I look forward to it.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see here. Favorite battle drill? We did that one. Caitlin asks, does the burning of Shireen have the potential to set off a grayscale epidemic? Do you think that John Kyneton being patient zero is more likely?
I think if grayscale develops into a serious problem, I feel it's more likely with John Con, just because there's already an apocalyptic source of destruction at the wall. And I think that, I don't know, I don't think you need a plague with the others right there. I think Shireen's burning is likely to be kind of a singular event focused on kind of just itself. And if the grayscale does spread, I think I lean towards John Con. What do you think?
So a lot of these questions about like, what are these, like, is grayscale actually going to become a major thing in Westeros? Does George have the time in 2 books to do a epidemic hitting Westeros at the time of a massive civil war and a massive dragon war, and the others coming, of course, too, which is somewhere on the horizon? I don't know. I do think I honestly think it's unlikely that there'll be a grayscale epidemic in the way that some people might want to see that and depicted on page. If it happens, it's likely going to be like mentioned in like small council scenes and stuff like that. There was something interesting that George said somewhat recently when he was talking about how he was not being impacted by COVID-19 because he was up in his cottage in the woods, in which he had said something to the effect of, yeah, things are grim here in the real world, just like in Westeros right now. So maybe that's indicating there's potential for grayscale outbreak, but I really hope that's not the case.
I could see it just maybe being in the background, but yeah, it seems like it's kind of over-egging the pudding in terms of sources of disaster at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. So George just gotta just say it's gonna be 8 books if he's gonna add all of these different things.
Agreed.
In time.
A Time for Plagues, book 7.
Now I do think that John Kyneton potentially in the battle might try cut his hand off or something like that. Be like, oh, I lost my hand at the battle. Look.
Sure, I could see that.
But then it might spread up his arm as talked about in Dance with Dragons. But we'll see. Guilty Undertaker asks, who were the people calling Robb Stark's name in the King's Landing crowd?
I mean, yeah, they were crying out the young wolf along with his name, so I think it's, his legend has spread, and he's popular and charismatic, and it's not everyone in the crowd is attached to the idea of a strict claimant to the Iron Throne. They just might want a hero.
And anything is better than what's currently ruling King's Landing, right? I mean, they're calling. I'm surprised they didn't call for Balon Greyjoy. That's how bad shit got in King's Landing, right? Just throw him in there too.
Rob defeated the Lannisters specifically, so I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, he's the alternative that has actually shown the teeth of being able to potentially defeat the Lannisters in battle, and has done that obviously so far at Whispering Wood, the Battle of the Camps, and Oxcross as well, because that's just happened in the series too. So yeah. Frank asks, "Hi Frank, and get back to studying. What is your favorite drill tweet or meme tweet?"
I like the one about flipping off God and walking backwards into hell.
That's what I was gonna say.
Oh no, I'm sorry to steal it from you. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that one's definitely really, really good. I just like his pin tweet, which just no.
True, can't go wrong there.
Lakers Chone asks, besides Ned, who are the best fathers in this series? Well, is Ned actually a good father?
It's debatable. In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. But as a father yourself, sir, who would be on top of your list?
Mace Tyrell.
Sure, he does a good job. He doesn't seem to play favorites too much and give them their own destinies.
I mean,
within limits, of course, but yeah.
I'm going to make the affirmative case for Mace Tyrell as a good dad here. So Mace has 4 children, right? He's got Loras, Marjorie, Garland, and Willis. All of them are really individual. They're unique, and they're all allowed to be who they want to be. As George has talked about in So Spake Martin, the entire Tyrell family is aware that Loras Tyrell is gay, and they don't really give a shit about it. They have a toleration for it. Now, there's some levels to that as well, because you can't openly come out and declare himself as he actually is. But otherwise, Marjorie is well-read, learned, educated likely in Highgarden itself. And Willis, despite having a disability, was not disinherited by his father, the same way that Tywin attempts to do with Tyrion, because he's still pining for Jaime to actually abandon the White Cloak and assume the heirship to Casterly Rock. So I would say that, and Garland is allowed to be a knight and be a renowned warrior. And all the kids, they get along. They don't fight. They don't conspire against each other, so far as we know. So I'm making the case that Mace Tyrell is the best father in the series.
That's a solid choice. I think he's definitely one of the better ones among the noble class of Westeros. I might go with Tormund. I always liked the little bits of fatherhood we get from him, that he's proud of his sons, and even the ones he's not particularly proud of, he still loves them and wants to keep them safe. And he's fond of his daughter, but glad she's moving on to a man that she actually likes. And I think he strikes me as a realistic dad within his culture. So I always approve of that.
Yeah, he seems like a good dude. I mean, it's one of my favorite characters among the wildlings. So
agreed.
Yeah. Guilty Undertaker asks, did the show ever give the Unsullied and the Dothraki a reason for not killing Jon and Tyrion immediately, despite having no reason to keep them alive?
Well, we don't really see Jon. I mean, this is after Jon kills Daenerys. I mean, do we really see Jon getting arrested?
No, he just shows up at the very small council scene, which is supposed to be the Great Council of Westeros, with a very long beard and long hair. So it's clearly he's been in prison for a long period of time, because I think the final scene is him holding Daenerys before Drogon burns the Iron Throne and then flies away.
Sure. Well, I guess Grey Worm just doesn't necessarily want to fight to the death against the Northern forces unless he doesn't have to. But it's hard to tell exactly how nihilistic Grey Worm is supposed to be at that point, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of this stuff is, for all of the things that season 8 did okay at, a lot of it was rushed and was not. I mean, I think it was thought through at some level, but I think they didn't have the time to really develop the dynamic to explain this. We have to kind of infer things from stuff that wasn't shown in the show itself. And I'm not saying that we need to be shown every single thing, every single plot point, but I do think it's important for some of the stuff to have some explanation, and we don't have it, unfortunately. Mick asks, Emmett, will you and Chloe have a Song of Ice and Fire themed wedding? I love the music in Game of Thrones when Joffrey and Marjorie exchange vows. So regal. Would love that if I was getting married.
Well, that's sweet, but I think we're gonna we want it to be about us more than the fandom specifically. And we just hope things are in a better position to have a wedding at that point. Of course, I've known several friends who've had to cancel theirs, so we'll see.
Yeah, cancellations and also like reductions of the people who can be there and stuff like that. It's been
for sure. Ours is a long way off, so we're still hoping to have that. But the venue we have is lovely, so I'm happy about
that. I'm looking forward to that. Yeah,
good.
Micah asks, which POVs would win Monopoly and who would be the first to go bankrupt?
What do you think, sir?
Well, Robert would be the first one to go bankrupt because he bankrupted the realm already.
But among POVs, Micah asks.
John, maybe, because he's and Stannis because they took out loans from the bank already, right? So they're already in debt. Cersei. There we go. Cersei would be the first to go bankrupt because she actually is bankrupt in the series.
That's probably true.
Defaulting on her loans to the Iron Bank.
I think Tyrion would probably do decently, I imagine. Sam, I could see doing quite well or quite poorly, depending on how nervous he gets. I think Arya would probably get frustrated. She'd flip over the board and walk away at some point.
Yeah. Absolutely. If you guys have questions that I haven't answered, feel free to post them below. I'm trying to scroll up. I can only scroll up so far with the application that we're using on Violent Messiah 666 says Stannis wrote the rules for Monopoly.
Well, then I have several bones to pick with him.
Okay, here's an interesting question from Max L. You guys think we'll ever get an answer to why Barrett kept coming back, or is that unimportant?
That's a good question. The fact that it's moved on to Stoneheart so thoroughly makes me think we won't. But I could see that getting explored somehow through Jon, potentially. Because Barrack stuck around in the show and they kind of gave a backfilled answer to that question in season 8, but that doesn't really apply to the books. What do you think?
Yeah, Thoros says that the Lord of Light willed him back, and that's why he came back. So I don't know. I think that Jon's going to be really kind of bummed out when he comes back. At least he seemed that way in the show, and I think he doesn't. In the show, it's indicated that he has no idea why he was brought back or what's on the other side and stuff like that. So I don't know that we'll get an answer. I think we'll get a lot more questions about the nature of resurrection and how these characters are actually brought back, but I'm not sure that we'll get any definitive answers. I'm not sure that George is interested in exploring that, but I guess we'll see. Take a few more.
Sure.
Kayla asks, do you think Sweet Robin is going to die at the turning of the Winged Knights?
Yeah, he's got to die soon. So I could definitely see that being a very dramatic moment in public at the height of it all, especially if Littlefinger intends on framing someone for it. That would make sense. I could see that.
Yeah, Littlefinger is slowly poisoning Sweet Robin. Now it's interesting. The wrenches, of course, is that Sweet Robin survives in the show, and is that indicating something that's going to happen in the books as well? I don't know. Sweet Robin seems like he's in really dire straits in the Vale right now. Sure. Nobody likes him. Littlefinger is trying to poison him with the mace. Is not Coleman, right? Because Coleman's the Dragonstone Maester, the one that's currently operating right now.
Coleman is
is Coleman the one? Yeah. Coleman? Oh, Coleman was purging, right? That's what my Pycelle says. Yeah, I think he's likely going to die in the books, but I'm kind of left with a question mark about why he survives in the show. So what happens to Lancel?
There's a theory that maybe he'll be the champion of the faith, although that doesn't make a huge amount of logistical sense given his shape, but it's certainly possible. Other than that, I could see him going down with the Sparrows when they all go down.
I still favor him being the faith's champion.
There is definitely a poetry to that makes it very appealing.
Yeah. So we talked about it in, is it Tyrion 5 or 6, the one where he turns Lancel into his own creature? I can't remember which Jasper, which episode was one of the Tyrion chapters. I mean, there's so many in the Clash of Kings that we talked about.
I think it's a solid theory. It could definitely happen for sure.
Mm-hmm. Lara F asks, "What do you think is Brienne's endgame?" Lord Commander of the King's Guard. I'm calling it right now.
Yeah, I mean, she's the truest knight that we have in the story. I think that is very fitting. I could definitely that does make perfect sense. I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's most likely going to be her end state. Joshua asks, "Are the children of the forest evil?"
I don't think. No, I don't think they're like cackling with malice. I don't think they. I think it's probable that if they invented the White Walkers, that the White Walkers got out of control.
Mm-hmm.
I think the children of the forest, if they were total villains, they wouldn't have made the original pact with the First Men. I think they saw the end of their time coming and were not willing to go gently into the good night, and now they kind of seem to be. So I think it's sad. I think it's tragic if that is indeed what their backstory is. I wouldn't necessarily characterize them as like I unabashedly would say the people who ran Valyria were evil, and I would not jump to that conclusion for the Children of the Forest. Another big backstory element.
Right. I think they created the others in a magical ceremony, likely what we saw in season 6 of the show, and that's the extent of their evil. Is they opted for the nuclear bomb, so to speak, in order to defeat the First Men, and then their creation turned against them, as nuclear weapons kind of did for in the real world, so to speak. Samir asks, "Do you think we'll get a non-King's Landing riot in the Winds of Winter or Dream of Spring? Old Town? White Harbor? Oh, there we go. Volantis, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm sure we'll get something with that with the Widow of the Waterfront. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Volantis is likely going to be the spot where they'll have a riot there by the oppressed peoples, because of course it's what 4 of every 5 people in Volantis are slaves or have the slave
something
marker.
like that.
So it's an insane. Yeah, it's kind of like was it Haiti? Was the big slave revolt in the?
Yep.
Which is like the similar dynamic which occurred in Haiti.
Yeah, there's a similarly, not quite that ratio, but a very huge ratio that made that possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have an episode question. How about that? What's the best way, from Lena? She asked, "What's the best way, in your opinion, that the Lancers could have handled the riots?"
To abdicate? No. Feed people. That's like, even if you have to make the Lannister tables as empty as possible, you're not going to be able to sustain everyone, but you need to make a big public relations move like the Tyrells do in A Storm of Swords, or you're just going to keep losing people. I really think that's the only move. A lot of what they hate about the Lancers you can't really address or just aren't going to happen, but that has to change.
Yeah, I like during the riot itself, like what could the Lancers have done? I mean, they kind of did the best they could have to survive, I guess, in the moment of getting back to the Red Keep.
Sure.
I think mostly they were reacting at that point. So yeah, abdication seems like the best way to. They could have handled the riots before it even started. So maybe take 2 more and then we'll
Sure.
call it an evening.
Sounds fine.
MZYRAJ asks, "Do you think Mel can resurrect people like what happened with Barrack? Doesn't seem like she has before, and you talked about her maybe being a rogue student." Sad face.
I don't know if Melisandre has tried that or consciously knows that she can. I think she's going to try it with Jon, obviously, but maybe it'll be her first attempt. I don't know if she's been to a shy. Makes me think there ain't much she hasn't done, but she hasn't explicitly brought it up.
Right. And I think, was it Thoros said, maybe I'm confusing the show and the books. It's been a while since I've read the Arya chapters from Storm of Swords, but when Thoros is explaining how he's able to resurrect Barrack, like he did like the rite of the fire or something like that to Barrack or something like that.
Right.
And he rose, and then up he rose. Yeah. I think he said that about Catelyn before she became Stoneheart as well. I imagine that's probably like a similar rite across R'hlloric traditions of kind of this rite of fire, giving the kiss of life, so to speak, to someone who's just died. And then boom, Barrack rises from the grave, and potentially that's going to be the case for Jon as well. Although I think there's obviously some different aspects for Jon as well. Him being in Ghost, him potentially being encased in the ice cells, which is a theory that our friends at Radio Westeros have. That's really cool. But I think it's likely going to be similar to what Thoros did, and it will likely surprise Melisandre when it actually happens.
Yes, I think that's going to be an amazing moment. I don't think she's going to expect it quite to work, or maybe it'll be completely accidental on her part. That'll be wild.
Mm-hmm. All right, final question of the night. The Happy Masquerader asks, how do you feel about people sometimes claiming that George no longer feels passionate about the books?
I mean, that's objectively not true.
There you go.
Like, there's, he still talks about them a lot and still is clearly invested in the characters, and like he could stop. That always remains an option of his. I don't think it's clearly just not coming as easily as it did during Clash and Storm. And I imagine, I think the negative emotion I think he's feeling, if I had to guess from what he said about it, isn't lack of passion. It's regret about certain decisions he's made that he no longer can't do anything about, including, signing over the show when he did and not finishing the books when he did. And I imagine those make him feel less platonic and pure in his love for the Winds of Winter as he was in his love for Clash and Storm as he was writing them. But if he wasn't, given all the negative factors weighing it down at this point, if he didn't have passion for it, he wouldn't keep going.
Right.
So I think I think he still loves it. I just think it's just weighed down by a lot of stuff that just was not there in 1999 when he was writing at an incredible pace.
Yeah. I think he recently talked about how he was writing 150 manuscript pages a month when he was writing The Storm of Swords. And we have to contextualize that, and that George was not managing a theater. He was not a executive producer for Game of Thrones. He was not an executive producer for the House of the Dragon show, which is coming up. I think this question is like that. People are like, oh, the books are taking so long because George doesn't feel passionate about the books. And I think it's the exact fucking opposite of that. And that George feels so passionate about it that he's not willing to release substandard material. I talked about this in the past. I'll say it again. When George was saying back in 2015 that he was hoping to get the book out before season 6 of Game of Thrones, someone had said something. This is super old information, so it's not a big deal, I guess. But someone had said that George was very close to being finished the books, and he had written certain people to say like he was this close, but he just didn't feel that the book was up to snuff. And that's it's kind of, I think it's actually extremely admirable that George was able to be like, no, I've got this basically complete book, but I'm not going to release it because it's not good enough as it stands right now. That to me indicates a degree of passion about the books that goes beyond simply like just even loving the material that you're writing. That speaks to George's integrity as a writer. Obviously all of us would wish that George himself would wish that the books were finished faster, but I would prefer, and most people would prefer a book, in retrospect, most people would prefer a book that's extremely well written, that's well plotted, that is extremely dense in the way that Feast and Dance were, and they took long times to create. And I have to imagine, and my hope is that George's writing for The Winds of Winter will lead to books for The Winds of Winter and the Dream of Spring being even better than A Feast for Crows and Dance of Dragons, which of course are George's 2 best books. I completely agree. I think it's if anything, the passion makes it take longer, and that's very frustrating, but also very compelling, and part of what makes it special. Absolutely. So I think that's going to wrap us up for this little Q&A session at the end of every episode. Again, we appreciate all of you guys watching and participating and hanging out with us. It's an honor to be doing this every single week with you, sir, and of course to be doing this with all of you folks as well. I think it's so much fun to have the interaction with people who are listening to us. It's gratifying, and it's fun. I enjoy it. I say that every single time, but it's true every single time too.
I agree completely. Thanks so much for watching, everybody.
Have a good night.